might hold good, or his being Taviran. But then, being Taviran had never brought anything other than bad that he could see. The lines at the entrance are already as long as they were at their best yesterday, Luca said, gesturing expansively. They were inside Luca's huge, gaudy wagon early on the morning after Rennett's death, and the tall man sat in the gilded chair at the narrow table, a real table with stools tucked under for guests. Most other wagons had an affair rigged on ropes from the ceiling, and people sat on the beds to eat. Luca had not yet donned one of his flamboyant coats, but he made up for it with gestures. Littell, his wife, was cooking breakfast porridge on a small iron-topped brick stove built into a corner of the windowless wagon, and the air was sharp with spices. The harsh-faced woman put so many spices into everything she prepared that it was all inedible in Matt's estimation, yet Luca always gobbled down whatever she set in front of him, as if
Hey,
it were a
Fire, how
feast.
you doing?
He must have a leather tongue. I expect twice as many visitors today, maybe 3 times as many, and tomorrow as well. People can't see everything in one visit, and here they can afford to come twice. Word of mouth, Cawthon. Word of mouth. That brings as many as Aludra's night flowers. I feel almost like Taviran, the way things are falling out. Large audiences and the prospect of war. A warrant protection from the High Lady. Luca cut off abruptly, looking faintly embarrassed, as if he had just remembered that Matt's name was on that warrant as being excluded from protection. You might not like it if you really were Taviran, Matt muttered, which made the other man give him an odd look. He put a finger behind the black silk scarf that hid his hanging scar and tugged at it. For a moment, the thing had felt too tight. He had spent a night of bleak dreams about corpses floating downstream, woken to the dice spinning in his head, always a bad sign, and now they seemed to be bouncing off the inside of his skull harder than before. I can pay you as much as you'll make for every show you give between here and Lugard, no matter how many people attend. That's on top of what I promised for carrying us to Lugard. If the show was not stopping all the time, they could cut the time to reach Lugard by 3/4 at the least. More if he could convince Luca to spend whole days on the road instead of half days the way they did now. Luca seemed taken with the idea, nodding thoughtfully, but then he shook his head with a sadness that was plainly feigned and spread his hands. And what will that look like? A traveling show that never stops to give shows? It will look suspicious, that's what. I have the warrant, and the High Lady will speak up for me besides. But you
Rolling up.
certainly don't want to pull the Shonshan down on us. No, it's safer for us this way. The man was not thinking of Matt Cawthon's bloody safety. He was thinking that his bloody shows might earn him more than Matt paid. That, plus making himself as much the center of attention as any of the performers, was nearly as important to him as gold. Some of the show folk talked of what they would do when they retired. Not Luca. He intended to keep on until he fell over dead in the middle of the show, and he would arrange it so he had the largest audience possible when he did. It's ready, Vaughn, Littell said affectionately as she lifted the iron pot from the stove with a cloth protecting her hands and set it down on a thick woven mat on the table. 2 places had already been set, with white glazed plates and silver spoons. Luca would have silver spoons when everyone else settled for tin or pot metal or even horn or wood. Stern-eyed, with a hard set to her mouth, the bear trainer looked quite odd wearing a long white apron over her spangled blue dress. Her bears probably wished they had trees to climb when she frowned at them. Strangely, though, she jumped to ensure her husband's comforts. Will you be eating with us, Master Cawthon? There was no welcome in that. In fact, just the opposite, and she showed no sign of turning to the cupboard where the plates were stored. Matt gave her a bow that soured her face further. He had never been less than civil to the woman, but she refused to like him. I thank you for the kind invitation, Mistress Luca, but no. She grunted. So much for being courteous. He put on his flat-brimmed hat and left, the dice rattling away. Luca's big wagon, glittering in red and blue and covered with golden stars and comets, not to mention the phases of the moon in silver, stood in the middle of the show, as far as possible from the animals' smelly cages and the horse lines. It was surrounded by smaller wagons, little houses on wheels, most windowless and most painted just a single color with none of Luca's extra decorations, and by wall tents, the size of small houses in blue or green or red, sometimes striped. The sun stood nearly its own height above the horizon in a sky where a sprinkling of white clouds drifted slowly, and children ran playing with hoops and balls, while the showfolk were limbering up for their morning performances, men and women twisting and stretching, many with glittering, colorful spangles on their coats or dresses. Four contortionists in filmy trousers tied at the ankle, and blouses thin enough to leave little to the imagination, made him wince. Two were sitting on their own heads atop blankets spread on the ground beside their red tent, while the others had twisted themselves into a pair of knots that looked beyond untying. Their backbones must have been made of spring wire. Petra, the strong man, stood bare-chested beside the green wagon he shared with his wife, warming up by lifting weights with either hand that Matt was not sure he could have lifted with both. The man had arms thicker than Matt's legs, and he was not sweating at all. Clarine's dogs stood in a line at the steps of the wagon, wagging their tails and eagerly waiting on their trainer. Unlike Rattel's bears, Matt figured the plump woman's dogs performed so they could make her smile. He was always tempted to just sit quietly somewhere when the dice were clicking in his head, someplace nothing seemed likely to happen, waiting for the dice to stop. And though he would have enjoyed watching some of the female acrobats, a number of whom were as little as the contortionists, he set out to walk the half-mile to Jurador, eyeing everyone on the wide, hard-packed clay road closely. There was a purchase he hoped to make. People were coming to join the long line, waiting behind a stout rope stretched along the show's tall canvas wall, only a handful with more than a touch of embroidery on the women's dresses or the men's short coats, and a few farmers' high-wheeled carts lumbering behind a horse or an ox. Figures moved among the small forested windmills that pumped the salt wells in the low hills behind the town, and around the long evaporation pans. A merchant's train of canvas-covered wagons, 20 of them behind 6-horse teams, rumbled out of the town gates as he approached, the merchant herself in a bright green cloak seated beside the driver of the first wagon. A flock of crows cawed past overhead, giving him a chill, but no one vanished before his eyes, and everybody cast a long shadow so far as he could make out. There were no dead people's shades walking the road today, although he was convinced that was what he had seen the day before. The dead walking surely could mean nothing good. Very likely it had something to do with Tom and Guyton and Rand. Colors whirled in his brain, and for an instant in his head, he saw Rand and Min standing beside a large bed, kissing. He stumbled and nearly tripped over his own boots. They had not been wearing any clothes. He would have to be careful thinking about Rand. The colors swirled and resolved for a moment, and he stumbled again. There were worse things to spy on than kissing. Very careful, what he thought. Light. The pair of guards leaning on their halberds at the iron-studded gates, hard-faced men in white breastplates and conical white helmets with horsetail crests, eyed him suspiciously. They probably thought he was drunk. A reassuring nod failed to change their expressions by a hair. He could have used a stiff drink right then. The guards did not try to stop him entering, though, just watched him pass. Drunks caused trouble, especially a man who was drunk this early in the day, but a drunk in a good coat, plain but well cut and good silk, a man with a little lace at his wrists, was an altogether different matter. The stone-paved streets of Jurador were noisy even at this hour, with hawkers carrying trays or standing behind barrows crying their wares, and shopkeepers beside narrow tables in front of their shops bellowing the fineness of their goods, and coopers hammering hoops onto barrels for shipping salt. The clatter of rug-makers' looms nearly drowned out the ringing of the occasional blacksmith's hammer, not to mention the music of flutes and drums and dulcimers drifting from inns and taverns. It was a jumble of a town, with shops and houses and inns, cheek by jowl with taverns and stables, all of stone and roofed with reddish tiles. A solid town, Jurador, and one accustomed to thievery. Most windows on the lower floors were covered with stout screens of wrought iron. The upper windows as well on the homes of the wealthy, most of whom were no doubt salt merchants. The music of the inns and taverns pulled at him. Likely there would be dice games going on in most of them. He could almost feel those dice spinning across the table. It had been too long since he had rattled a set of dice in his hands instead of inside his head, but he was not there for gambling this morning. He had had no breakfast yet, so he approached a wrinkled woman with a tray hung from a strap around her neck, who shouted, "Meat pies made from the finest beef to be found in Altara." He took her word for it and handed over the coppers she demanded. He had seen no cattle
Let me
in any
charge
farms
this
near
real
Jurador,
quick.
only sheep and goats. But it was best not to inquire too closely what was in a pie bought in the streets of any town. There could be cows on nearby farms. It could be. In any case, the meat pie was tasty and still hot for a wonder, and he walked on along the crowded street, juggling the pie and wiping greasy juice from his chin. He was careful not to bump into anyone in the throng. Altarans were a touchy lot, by and large. In this town, you could tell somebody's stationed to within a whisker by the amount of embroidery on coat or dress or cloak. The more the higher, long before you were close enough to tell wool from silk. Though the richer women covered their olive-skinned faces with transparent veils hung from ornate combs stuck into their tightly coiled braids. But men and women alike, whether salt merchants or ribbon hawkers, wore long belt knives with curved blades, and sometimes fondled the hilts as though looking for a fight. He always tried to avoid fighting, though his luck seldom did him much good there. Taviran took over with that, it seemed. The dice had never before signaled a fight. Battles, yes, but never a dust-up in the street. Yet he walked very carefully indeed. Not that that would help, of course. When the dice stopped, they stopped, and that was that. But he saw no reason to take chances. He hated taking chances. Except with gambling, of course, and that was hardly taking a chance for him. He spotted a barrel full of thick quarterstaffs and walking staffs in front of a shop displaying swords and daggers under the watchful eye of a bulky fellow with sunken knuckles, a nose that had been broken more than once, and a thick truncheon hanging at his belt beside the inevitable dagger. The man announced in a rough voice that all the blades on display were Andran made, but anybody who did not make his own blades always claimed they were Andran, or else from the borderlands. Or Tyrant sometimes. Tyr made good steel. To Matt's surprise and delight, slim stave of what appeared to be black yew, more than a foot taller than he was, stood upright in the barrel. Pulling the stave out, he checked the fine, almost braided grain. It was black yew, all right. That braided grain was what gave bows made from it such power, twice what any other wood could give. You could never be sure until you started slicing away the excess, but the stave looked perfect. How in the light had black yew come to be in southern Altara? He was sure it only grew in the Two Rivers. When the proprietor came out, a sleek woman with bright-feathered birds embroidered to below her bosom, and began extolling the virtues of her blades, he said, "How much for this black stick, mistress?" She blinked, startled that a man in silken lace wanted a quarterstaff. Slim as it was, she thought the thing was a bloody quarterstaff, and named a price that he paid without bargaining, which made her blink again and frown as if she thought she should have asked more. He would have paid more for the makings of the Two Rivers bow. With the raw bow stave over his shoulder, he walked on, wolfing down the last of the meat pie and wiping his hand on his coat. But he had not come for breakfast or a bow stave any more than for gambling. It was the stables that interested him. Livery stables always had a horse or three for sale, and if the price was right, they would usually sell one that had not been for sale. At least they did when the Shanshan had not snapped them up already. Luckily, the Shanshan presence in Jurador had been fleeting so far. He wandered from stable to stable, examining bays and roans, blue roans and piebalds, duns, sorrels, blacks, whites, greys, and dapples, all mares or geldings. A stallion would not serve his purposes. Not every animal he looked at had a shallow girth or long cannons, yet none matched what he had in mind. Until he entered a narrow stable jammed between a large stone inn called the 12 Salt Wells and a rug maker's shop. He would have thought the racketing looms would have bothered the horses, but they were all quiet, apparently accustomed to the noise. Stalls stretched farther into the block than he had expected, but lanterns hanging from the stall posts gave a fair light away from the doors. The air, speckled with dust from the loft above, smelled of hay and oats and horse dung, but not old dung. 3 men with shovels were mucking out stalls. The owner kept his place clean. That meant less chance of disease. Some stables he had walked out of after getting one whiff. The black and white mare was out of her stall on a rope halter while a groom put down fresh straw, and she stood squarely and with her ears perked forward, showing alertness. About
Oh, yeah, I
15 hands
appreciate that
tall,
fire.
she was long in
There's
front,
one.
with a deep girth that
Just
promised
got to get
endurance, and her
another
legs were
one rolling
perfectly
real quick.
proportioned with short cannons and a good angle to her fetlocks. Her shoulders were well sloped, and her croup dead level with her withers. She had lines as good as Pip's, or even better. More than that, she was a breed he had heard tell of, but never thought to see. A razor from Ardaman. No other breed would have that distinctive coloring. In her coat, black met white in straight lines that could have been sliced by a razor, hence the name. Her presence here was as mystifying as the black hue. He had always heard Nodamani would sell a razor to any outlander. He let his eyes sweep past her without lingering, studying the other animals in their stalls. Had the dice inside his head slowed? No, it was his imagination. He was sure they were spinning as hard as they had in Luca's wagon. A wiry man with only a fringe of gray hair remaining came forward, ducking his head over folded hands. Tok Fairnham, my lord, he introduced himself in rough accents, eyeing the bow stave on Matt's shoulder furiously. Men who wore silk coats and gold signet rings rarely carried such things. How can I be of service? My lord wishes to rent a horse or to buy. Embroidery, small bright flowers, covered the shoulders of the vest he wore over a shirt that might have been white once. Matt avoided looking at the flowers at all. The fellow had one of those curved knives at his belt and two long white scars on his leathery face. Old scars. Any fighting he had done lately had not marked him where it showed. Buy, Master Fearnham, if you have anything for sale. If I can find one that's halfway decent. I've had more spavined glue baits offered to me as 6-year-olds when they were 18 if a day than I can shake a stick at. He hefted the bow stave slightly with a grin. His Dar claimed bargaining went better if you could make the other fellow start grinning. I have 3 for sale, my lord. None of them spavined, the wiry man replied with another bow and no hint of a grin. Fearnham gestured. One is out of her stall there, 5 years old and prime horseflesh, my lord, and a steal at 10 crowns. Gold, he added blandly. Matt let his jaw drop. For a piebald? I know the Shawnshin have driven prices up, but that's ridiculous. Oh, she's not your common piebald, my lord. A razor is what she is. Damani bloodborne ride razors. Blood and bloody ashes. So much for catching a bargain. So you say, Matt muttered, lowering one end of the bow stave to the stone floor so he could lean on it. His hip seldom bothered him any longer, except when he did a lot of walking, but he had done so this morning, and he felt twinges. Well, bargain or no, he had to play out the game. There were rules to horse trading. Break them, and you were asking to have your purse emptied out. I've never heard of any horse called a razor myself. What else do you have? Only geldings or mares, mind. Geldings are all I have for sale, except the razor, my lord, Fearnham said, emphasizing the word razor a little. Turning toward the back of the stable, he shouted, Adela, bring out that big bay, what's for sale? A lanky young woman with a pimply face, in breeches and a plain dark vest, came darting out of the back of the stable to obey. Fearnham had Adela walk the bay, and then a dappled gray on rope leads in the good light near the doors. Matt had to hand him that. Their conformation was not bad at all. But the bay was too big, better than 17 hands, and the gray kept his ears half laid back and tried to bite Adela's hand twice. She was deft with the animals, though, easily evading the bad-tempered gray's lunges. Projecting the pair of them would have been easy if he had not had his mind set on the razor. A lean, gray-striped tomcat, like a ridge cat in miniature, appeared and sat at Fearnham's feet to lick a bloody gash on his shoulder. Rats are worse this year than I ever recall, the stable-keeper muttered, frowning down at the cat. They fight back more, too. I'm going to have to get another cat, or maybe 2. He brought himself back to the business at hand. Will my lord take a look at my prize, since the others don't suit? I suppose I could look at the piebald, Master Fearnham, Matt said doubtfully, but not for any 10 crowns. In gold, Fearnham said. Herd, walk the razor for the lord here. He emphasized the breed again. Working the man down would be difficult, unless he got some help for a change from being Taviran. His luck never helped with anything as straightforward as dickering. Herd was the fellow refreshing the straw in the razor's stall, a squat man who had about 3 white hairs left on his head and no teeth in his mouth at all. That was evident when he grinned, which he did while he led the mare in a circle. He clearly liked the animal, and well he should. She walked well, but Matt still inspected her closely. Her teeth said Fearnham had been honest enough about her age. Only a fool lied very far about a horse's age unless the buyer was a fool himself, though it was surprising how many sellers thought buyers were all just that. And her ears pricked toward him when he stroked her nose while checking her eyes. They were clear and bright, free of rheum. He felt along her legs without finding any heat or swelling. There was never a hint of a lesion or sore, or of ringworm anywhere on her. He could get his fist easily between her rib cage and her elbow. She would have a long stride, and was barely able to fit his flat hand between her last rib and the point of her hip. She would be hardy and likely to strain a tendon if run fast. The Lord knows his horseflesh, I see. That I do, Master Fearnham. And 10 crowns gold is too much, especially for a piebald. Some say they're bad luck, you know. Not that I believe it, not as such, or I wouldn't offer at all. Bad luck? I never heard that, my lord. What do you offer? I could get Tyrant bloodstock for 10 crowns gold. Not the best, true, but still Tyrant. I'll give you 10 crowns in silver. Fearnham threw back his head, laughing uproariously, and when he stopped, they settled down to the dickering. In the end, Matt handed over 5 crowns in gold, along with 4 marks gold and 3 crowns silver, all stamped in Ebudar. There were coins from many countries in the chest under his bed, but foreign coin usually meant finding a banker or money changer to weigh them and work out what they were worth locally. Aside from attracting more notice than he wanted, he would have ended paying more for the animal, maybe even the full 10 crowns gold. Money changers' scales always seemed to work that way. He had not expected to get the man down that far, but from Fearnham's expression, grinning at last, he had never expected to receive so much. It was the best way for horse trading to end, with both sides thinking they had come out ahead. All in all, the day had begun very well. Dice are no bloody dice. He should have known it would not last. When he got back to the show at midday, riding the razor bareback because of his aching hip, and with the dice rattling in his head, the line of people was longer than when he had left, waiting to pass beneath the big blue banner stretched between 2 tall poles that carried the show's name in big red letters. As people dropped their coins into the clear glass pitcher, held by a heavy-set horse handler in a rough woolen coat, to be poured from there into an iron-bound chest under the watchful eyes of another horse handler, who was even larger, more people joined the line, so it never seemed to grow shorter. The thing stretched beyond the end of the rope and around the corner. For a small wonder, no one was pushing or shoving. There were obvious farmers in the line, wearing rough woolens and with dirt ingrained in their hands, though the children's faces, and those of the farm wives at least, had been scrubbed clean. Luca was getting his hoped-for crowd, unfortunately. No chance of convincing him to leave tomorrow now. The dice said something was going to happen, something fateful to Matt Bloody Coffin,
appreciate that, Fire.
There had been times when the dice stopped, and he still had no idea what happened. Just inside the canvas wall, with people streaming past to enjoy the performers lining both sides of the main street, a Ludro was taking delivery of 2 wagon loads of barrels in various sizes. Of more than the barrels, it seemed. I will show you where to park the wagons, the slender woman told the driver of the lead wagon, a lean man with a jutting jaw. Aludra's waist-long beaded braids swung as her eyes followed Matt for a moment, but she quickly turned back to the wagon driver. The horses you will take to the horse lines afterward, yes? Now, what had she bought in such quantity? Something for her fireworks, certainly. Every night, soon after dark, so she would catch everyone before they went to bed, she launched her night flowers, 2 or 3 for a town the size of Jurador, or if there were several villages close together. He had had some thoughts on why she wanted a bell founder, but the only one that seemed to make any sense actually made no sense at all that he could see. He hid the mare on the horse lines. Well, you could not really hide a razor, but a horse was noticed less among horses, and the time was not right yet. The bostave he left in the wagon he shared with Aginan and Doman, neither of whom was there, then headed for Tuon's faded purple wagon. That was parked not far from Luca's wagon now, though Matt wished it had been left near the storage wagons. Only Luca and his wife knew that Tuon was a high lady rather than a servant who had been about to expose Matt and Aginan to her supposed husband as lovers. But many among the showfolk were already wondering why Matt spent more time with Tuon than with Aginan. Wondering and disapproving. They were an oddly prim lot for the most part, even the contortionists. Running off with the wife of a cruel lord was romantic. Canoodling with the lady's maid was sordid. Giving Tuon's wagon this favored spot among the people who had been with Luca for years and were his most prized performers was going to cause more talk. In truth, he hesitated about going to Tuon at all with the dice drumming in his head. They had stopped too often in her presence, and he still did not know the why for a single one of those times. Not for certain. Maybe the first time it had just been meeting her. Thinking of it made the hair on the back of his neck want to stand up. Still, with women, you always had to take chances. With a woman like Tuon, 10 chances a day, and never knowing the odds until it was too late. Sometimes he wondered why his luck failed to help him more with women. Women were certainly as unpredictable as any honest dice ever made. None of the Red Arms was on guard outside the wagon. They were beyond that now. So he trotted up the short flight of steps at the back of the wagon and rapped once before pulling the door open. And
I think I still got
after all, he paid the rent.
a little bit of a
It was
dab
hardly
left.
likely to be lying around unclothed at this time of day. Anyway, the door had a latch if they needed to keep people out. Mistress Annan was off somewhere, but the interior was still crowded. The narrow table had been let down on ropes from the ceiling, with mismatched plates of bread and olives and cheese laid out on it, along with one of Luca's tall silver wine pitchers, a squat red-striped pitcher, and flower-painted cups. Tuon, a month's growth of tightly curled black hair on her head, sat on the wagon's sole stool at the far end of the table, with Selucia sitting on one of the beds at her side, and Noel and Olver on the other bed, elbows on the table. Today, Selucia was in the dark blue Abudari dress that displayed her memorable bosom so well, with a flowered scarf tied around her head. But Tuon wore a red dress that seemed to be made entirely of tiny pleats. He'd only bought her the silk yesterday. How had she convinced to show seamstresses the dress already? He was pretty certain that usually took longer than a day. With liberal promises of his gold, he suspected. Well, if you bought a woman's silk, you pay to have it sewn. He had heard that saying as a boy, when he never expected to be able to afford silk. But it was the light's own truth. Only the women are ever seen outside their villages, Noel was saying. But the gnarled white-haired old man cut off when Matt entered the wagon, pulling the door shut behind him. The straps of lace at Noel's wrists had seen better days, as he had a coat of fine gray wool. But both were clean and neat, and the looked odd with his crooked fingers and battered face. Those belonged in an aging tavern tough, one who had gone on fighting long past his prime. Over, in the good blue coat Matt had made for him, grinned as widely as an ogier. Life, he was a good boy, but he would never be handsome with those big ears and that wide mouth. His manner with women needed better if he was ever to have any luck there at all. Matt had been trying to spend more time with Oliver to get him away from the influence of his uncles,
Name me break a little sweat.
and the other
And it
Red
wasn't even
Arms.
that good of a
The
dab.
boy seemed to enjoy that. Just
There
not
was
as much
the
as he enjoyed
remnants
playing
of
snakes and foxes or stones
that last
with
dab
Tuon
I took.
and staring
So
at Selucia's bosom. It was all very well for those fellows to teach Oliver how to shoot a bow and use a sword and the like, but if Matt ever learned who was teaching him to lead her... Manners, toy, Tuon drawled like honey sliding out of a dish. Hard honey. Around him, unless they were playing stones, her expression was usually severe enough for a judge handing down a death sentence, and her tone matched it. You will knock, then wait for permission to enter. Unless you are property or a servant, then you do not knock. You also have grease on your coat. I expect you to keep yourself clean. Bolter's grin faded at hearing that admonished. Noel raked bent fingers through his long hair and sighed, and began studying the green plate in front of him as if he might find an emerald among the olives. Grim tone or no grim tone, Matt enjoyed looking at the dark little woman who was to be his wife, who was halfway his wife already. Like all she had to do was say 3 sentences and the thing was done. Burn him, but she was beautiful. Once he had mistaken her for a child, but that had been because of her size, and her face had been obscured by a transparent veil. Without that veil, it was plain that that heart-shaped face belonged to a woman. Her big eyes were dark pools a man could spend a lifetime swimming in. Her rare smiles could be mysterious or mischievous, and he prized them. He enjoyed making her laugh, too, at least when she was not laughing at him. True, she was a little slimmer than he had always preferred, but if he could ever get an arm around her without Solutia there, he believed she would feel just right. And he might convince her to give him a few kisses with those full lips. Like he dreamed about that sometimes. Never mind that she called him down as if they were really married. Well, almost never mind. Burn him if he could see what a little grease mattered. Lopin and Narum, the 2 serving men he was saddled with, would fight over which one got to clean the coat. They had little enough to do that they really would if he did not name who received the task. He did not say that to her. Women like nothing better than making you defend yourself, and once you started, she had won. I'll try to remember that, Precious, he said with his best smile, sliding beside Solutia and putting his hat down on the other side from her. The blanket scrunched up between them, and they were a foot apart to boot. Yet you would have thought he had pressed himself against her hip. Her eyes were blue, but the furious look she gave him was hot enough. His coat should have been singed. I hope there's more water than wine in that cup in front of Olga. It's goat's milk, the boy said indignantly. Ah, well, maybe Olga was still a little too young even for well-watered wine. Tuan sat up very straight, though she was still shorter than Solutia, who was a short woman herself. What did you call me? She said, as close to crisply as her accent allowed. Precious. You have a pet name for me, so I thought I should have one for you, Precious. He thought Selutia's eyes were going to pop right out of her head. I see, Tuan murmured, pursing her lips in thought. The fingers of her right hand waggled as though idly, and Solutia immediately slid off the bed and went to one of the cupboards. She still took time to glare at him over Tuan's head. Very well, Tuan said after a moment. It will be interesting to see who wins this game, toy. Matt's smile slipped. Game? He was just trying to regain a little balance. But she saw a game, and that meant he could lose. Was likely to, since he had no idea what the game was. Why did women always make things so complicated? Solutia resumed her place and slid a chipped cup in front of him, and a blue-glazed plate that held half a loaf of crusty bread, 6 varieties of pickled olives mounted up, and 3 sorts of cheese. That perked his spirits again. He had hoped for this, if not expected it. Once you got a woman feeding you, she had a hard time finding it in herself to stop you from putting your feet under her table again. The thing of it is, Noel said, resuming his tale, in those Ayad villages, you can see women of any age, but no men, much above 20, if that. Not a one. Oliver's eyes grew even wider. The boy practically inhaled Noel's tales about the countries he had seen, even the lands beyond the Aiel Waste, swallowed them whole without butter. Are you any relation to Jane Charn, Noel? Matt chewed an olive and discreetly spat the pit into his palm. The thing tasted not far from spoiling. So did the next one. But he was hungry, so he gobbled them down and followed with some crumbly white goat cheese while ignoring the frowns Tuan directed at him. The old man's face went still as stone, and Matt had torn off a piece of bread and eaten that as well before Noel answered. "A cousin," he said at last, grudgingly. "He was my cousin." "You're related to Jane Farstrider?" Oliver said excitedly. His favorite book was the Travels of Jane Farstrider, which he would have sat up reading by lamplight long past his bedtime had Julian and Thera allowed. He said he intended to see everything Farstrider had when he grew up, all that and more. "Who is this man with two names?" Tuan asked. "Only great men are spoken of so, and you speak as if everyone should know him." "He was a fool," Noel said grimly before Matt could open his mouth, though Oliver did get his open and left it gaping while the old man continued. "He went gallivanting about the world and left a good and loving wife to die of a fever without him there to hold her hand while she died. He let himself be made into a tool by—" Abruptly, Noel's face went blank. Staring through Matt, he rubbed at his forehead as though attempting to recall something. "Jane Farstrider was a great man," Oliver said fiercely. His hands curled into small fists, as though he was ready to fight for his hero. "He fought Trollocs and Murdrol, and he had more adventures than anyone else in the whole world, even Matt. He captured Cowan Germalin after Germalin betrayed Malkir to the Shadow." Noel came to himself with a start and patted Oliver's shoulder. "He did that, boy. That much is to his credit. But what adventure is worth leaving your wife to die alone?" He sounded sad enough to die on the spot himself. Oliver had no answer to that, and his face fell. If Noel had put the boy off his favorite book, Matt was going to have words with the old man. Reading was important. He read himself. Sometimes he did. And he made sure Oliver had books he enjoyed. Standing, Tuan leaned across the table to rest a hand on Noel's arm. The stern look had vanished from her face, replaced by tenderness. A wide belt of dark yellow fulled leather cinched her waist, emphasizing her slim curves. More of his coin spent. Well, coin was always easy to come by for him, and if she did not spend it, likely he would throw it away on some other woman. "You have a good heart, Master
Oh,
Champion."
yeah, cheers, fam.
She gave everybody their bloody names except for Matt Coffin. "Do I, milady?" Noel said, sounding as though he really wanted to hear an answer. "Sometimes I think—" Whatever he thought sometimes, they were not to learn it now. The door swung open, and Julian put his head into the wagon. The Tyrant thief-catcher's conical red hat was at its usual jaunty angle, but his dark face was worried. "Shan soldiers are setting up across the road. I'm going to Thera. She'll take a fright if she hears it from anybody else." And as quickly as that, he was gone again, leaving the door swinging. Chapter 7. A Cold Medallion. Shan soldiers. Blood and bloody ashes. That was all Matt needed, with the dice spinning his head. "No, find the Geenan and Warner. Oliver, you won the Aes Sedai, and Bethaman and Seda." Those five would all be together, or at least close by one another. The two former Suldam shadowed the sisters whenever they left the wagon they all shared. Lighty hoped none of them had gone into the town again. That could put a weasel in the chicken yard for sure. "I'll go down to the entrance and try to see if we're in any trouble." "She won't answer to that name," Noel muttered, sliding out from the table. He moved spryly for a fellow who looked to have half the bones in his body broken one time or another. "You know she won't." "You know who I mean," Matt told him sharply, frowning at Tuan and Selucia. This name foolishness was their fault. Selucia had told Aginin that her name was now Lylewyn Shiftless, and that was the name Aginin was using. Well, he was not about to put up with that sort of thing, not for himself and not for her. She had to come to her senses, soon or late. "I'm just saying," Noel said. "Come on over." Matt slid off after them, but before he reached the door, Tuan spoke. "No warnings for us to remain inside, Toy? No one left to guard us?" The dice said he should find Harnan or one of the other Red Arms and plant him outside just to guard against accidents, but he did not hesitate. "You gave your word," he said, settling his hat on his head. The smile he got in reply was worth the risk. Run him, but it lit up her face. Women were always a gamble, but sometimes a smile could be win enough. He saw from the entrance that Jurador's days without a Shonchan presence had come to an end. Directly across the road from the show, 700 men were taking off armor, unloading wagons, setting up tents in
I'll be
ordered
right
rows,
back.
establishing horse lines. All very efficiently done. He saw Tarabanners with mail veils hanging from their helmets and bars of blue, yellow, and green painted across their breastplates, and men who were clearly infantry, stacking long pikes and racking bows, much shorter than a Two Rivers bow, in armor painted the same. He thought those must be Almadicians. Neither Taraban nor Altara ran much to foot, and Altarans in service to the Shonchan had their armor marked differently for some reason. There were actual Shonchan, of course, perhaps 20 or 30 that he could see. There was no mistaking that painted armor of overlapping plates or those strange insectile helmets. 3 of the soldiers came ambling across the road, lean, hard-bitten men. Their blue coats, with the collars striped green and yellow, were plain enough despite the colors, and showed the wear of armor use, but no signs of rank. Not officers, then, but still maybe as dangerous as red adders. 2 of the fellows could have been from Andor or Murandy or even the Two Rivers, but the third had eyes tilted like a Saldaean's, and his skin was the color of honey. Without slowing, they started into the show. One of the horse handlers at the entrance gave a shrill 3-note whistle that began to echo through the show, while the other, a squint-eyed fellow named Bolin, pushed the glass pitcher in front of the 3. "Price is a silver penny each, Captain," he said with deceptive mildness. I'd have heard the big man speak in the same tone, a heartbeat, before he thumped another horse handler over the head with a stool. "Children is 5 coppers if they's more than waist high on me, and 3 if they's shorter, but only children that has to be carried gets in free." The honey-skinned Shonchan raised a hand as if to push Bolin out of his way, then hesitated, his face growing harder, if that was possible. The other 2 squared up beside him, fists clenched as pounding boots announced the arrival of every man in the show, it seemed, performers in their flashy garb and horse handlers in coarse wool. Every man had a club of some sort in his hand, including Luca, in a brilliant red coat embroidered with gold stars to his turned-down boot tops, and even the bare-chested Petra, who possessed the mildest nature of any man had ever met. Petra's face was a thunderhead now, though. Right, this had the makings of a massacre, with these fellows' companions not 100 paces away and all their weapons to hand. It was a good place for Matt Coffin to take himself out of. Surreptitiously, he touched the throwing knives hidden up his sleeves and shrugged just to feel the one hanging down behind the back of his neck. No way to check those under his coat or in his boots without being noticed, though. The dice seemed like continuous thunder. He began to plan how to get to one and the others away. He had to hang on to her a while longer yet. Before disaster could open the door, another Shonchan appeared, in blue, green, and yellow striped armor, but carrying her helmet on her right hip. She had the tilted eyes and honey-colored skin, and there was a scattering of white in her close-cropped black hair. She was near a foot shorter than any of the other 3, and there were no plumes on her helmet, just a small crest like a bronzed arrowhead at the front. But the 3 soldiers stood up very straight when they saw her. "Now why am I not surprised to find you here what looks to be the fine beginnings of a riot, Mira?" Her slurred accent had a twang in it. "What's this all about, then?" "We paid our money, standard-bearer," the honey-skinned man replied in the same twangy accents. "Then they said we had to pay more on account of us being soldiers of the Empire." Bolin opened his mouth, but she silenced him with a raised hand. She had that kind of presence. Running her eyes over the men gathered in a thick semicircle with their clubs, and pausing a moment to shake her head over Luca, she settled on Matt. "Did you see what happened?" "I did," Matt replied. "And they tried to walk in without paying." "That's good for you, Mira," she said, getting a surprised blink from the man. "Good for all 3 of you. Means you won't be out your coin, because you're all confined to camp for 10 days. And I doubt this show will be here that long. You're all docked 10 days' pay as well. You're supposed to be unloading wagons so the home folks don't get the idea we think we're better than they are. Or do you want a charge of causing dissension in the ranks?" The 3 men paled visibly. Apparently that was a serious charge. "I didn't think so. Now, get out of my sight and get to work before I make it a full month instead of a week. Yes, Standard Bearer, they snapped out as one, then ran back across the road as hard as they could go while tugging off their coats. Hard men, yet the Standard Bearer was harder. She was not finished, however. Luca stepped forward, bowing with a grand flourish, but she cut off whatever thanks he was about to offer. I don't much like fellows threatening my men with cudgels, she drawled, resting a free hand on her sword hilt. Not even Nero. Not at these odds. Still shows you have backbone. Any of you fine fellows want a life of glory and adventure? Step across the road with me and I'll sign you up. You there in that fancy red coat. You have the look of a born lancer to me. I'll wager I can whip you into a proper hero in no time. A ripple of head-shaking ran through the assembled men, and some, seeing that no trouble was likely now, began slipping away. Petra was one of those. Luca looked as though he had been poleaxed. A number of others appeared almost as stunned by the offer. Performing paid better than soldiering, and you avoided the risk of people sticking swords into you. Well, as long as you're standing there, maybe I can convince you. Not likely you'll get rich, but the pay is usually on time, and there's always the chance of loot if the order is given. Happens now and then. The food varies, but it's usually hot, and there's usually enough to fill your belly. The days are long, but that just means you're tired enough to get a good night's sleep. When you don't have to work the night too. Anyone interested yet? Luca gave himself a shake. Thank you, Captain, but no, he said, sounding half strangled. Some fools thought soldiers were flattered by someone thinking they had a higher rank than they did. Some fool soldiers were. Excuse me, if you please. We have a show to put on, and people who aren't going to be pleased if they have to wait much longer to see it. With a last wary look at the woman, as if he feared she might try to drag him off by his collar, he rounded on the men behind him. All of you, get back to your stands. What are you doing lounging around here? I have everything well in hand. Get back to your stands before people start demanding their money back. That would have been a disaster in his book. Given the choice between handing back coin and having a riot, Luca would have been unable to decide which was worse. With the show folk dispersing and Luca hurrying away while shooting glances at her over his shoulder, the woman turned to Matt, the only man remaining aside from those two horse handlers. And what about you? From the look of you, you might be made an officer and get to give me orders. She sounded amused by the notion. He knew what she was doing. The people in the line had seen 3 Shanshan soldiers sent running, and who could say for sure why they had run, but now they had seen her disperse a much larger crowd by herself. He would have given her a place in the band as a bannerman in a breath. I'd make a terrible soldier, Standard Bearer, he said, tipping his hat, and she laughed. As he turned away, he heard Bullen saying mildly, You didn't hear what I told that man? It's a silver penny for you and another for your good wife. Coins clinked into the pitcher. Thank you. Things were back to normal. The dice were still racketing in his head. Making his way through the show, where acrobats were again tumbling for the crowds on their wooden platforms and jugglers juggling, and Clarine's dogs running atop large wooden balls, and Miora's leopards standing on their hind legs inside a cage that looked barely strong enough to hold them, he decided to check on the Aes Sedai. The leopards brought them to mind. The common soldiers might spend the day working, yet he would have laid coin on at least some of the officers coming for a look before long. He trusted Tuon strangely enough, and Beginning had enough sense to stay out of sight when there might be other Shanshan around. But common sense seemed in short supply among Aes Sedai. Even Tesman and Edicina, who had spent time as Damani, took foolish chances. Jolene, who had not, seemed to think herself invulnerable. Everybody in the show knew the 3 women were Aes Sedai now, but their large wagon, covered with rain-streaked whitewash, still stood near the canvas-topped storage wagons not far from the horse lines. Luca had been willing to rearrange his show for a high lady who gave him a warrant of protection, but not for Aes Sedai, who put him at risk with their presence and were practically penniless besides. The women among the show folk were sympathetic to the sisters for the most part, the men wary to one degree or another. It was almost always so with Aes Sedai. but Luca likely would have turned them out to make their own way without Nat's gold. Aes Sedai were more threat than anything else, so long as they were in lands controlled by the Seanchan. Matt Coughlin got no thanks for it, not that he was looking for any. He would have settled for a touch of respect, unlikely as that was. Aes Sedai were Aes Sedai, after all. Jolene's warders, Blerick and Fenn, were nowhere to be seen, so there was no need to talk his way past them to get inside, but as he approached the dirt-streaked steps at the back of the wagon, the fox-head medallion hanging beneath his shirt went icy cold against his chest, then colder still. For a moment he froze like a statue. Those fool women were channeling in there. Coming to himself, he pounded up the steps and banged the door open. The women he expected to see were all present. Jolene, the green sister, slender and pretty and big-eyed, and Tesla, a narrow-shouldered red who looked as though she chewed rocks, and Edicina, a yellow, handsome, rather than pretty, with waves of black hair spilling to her waist. He had saved all three from the Seanchan, had gotten Tesla and Edicina out of the demonic kennels themselves, yet their gratitude was variable, to say the best. Bethamin, as dark as Tuon, but tall and nicely rounded, and yellow-haired Sita had been Sul'dam before they were forced into helping rescue the three Aes Sedai. The five of them shared this wagon, the Aes Sedai to keep an eye on the former Sul'dam to keep an eye on the Aes Sedai. None realized their task, but mutual distrust made them carry it out assiduously. The one woman he had not expected to see was Satella Amun, who had kept the wandering woman in Abu Dar before she decided to make herself part of that rescue for some reason. But then Satella had a way of pushing herself in, of meddling, in fact. She meddled between him and Tuon incessantly. What they were doing was completely unexpected, though. In the middle of the wagon, Bethamin and Sita were standing rigid as fence posts, jammed shoulder to shoulder between the two beds that could not be raised against the walls, and Jolene was slapping Bethamin's face again and again, first with one hand, then the other. Silent tears trickled down the tall woman's cheeks, and Sita looked afraid that she would be next. Edicina and Tesla, arms folded beneath their breasts, were watching with no expression whatsoever, while Mistress Amun frowned her disapproval over Tesla's shoulder. Whether disapproval of the slapping or of what Bethamin had done to earn it, he could not have said and did not care. Crossing the floor in one stride, he seized Jolene's upraised arm and spun her around. "What in the light are you—" That was as far as he got before she used her other hand to catch him a buffet so hard that his ears rang. "Now that killed the goat," he said, and, spots still floating in his vision, he dropped down onto the nearest bed and pulled a surprised Jolene across his lap. His right hand landed on her bottom with a loud smack that pulled a startled squawk from her. The medallion went colder still, and Edicina gasped when nothing happened, but he tried to keep one eye on the other two sisters and one eye on the open door for Jolene's warders, while he held her in place and whacked as fast and as hard as he could. With no idea how many shifts of petticoats she was wearing under that worn blue wool, he wanted to make sure he left an impression. It seemed his hand was beating time for the dice spinning in his head. Struggling and kicking, Jolene began cursing like a wagon driver, as the medallion seemed to turn to ice, and then to grow so cold he wondered if it would give him frostbite. But he soon added wordless yelps to her pungent vocabulary. His arm might not match Petra's, but he was far from weak. Practice with bow and quarterstaff gave him strong arms. Edicina and Teslin seemed as frozen in place as the two wide-eyed former Sul'dam. Well, Bethamin was grinning, and she appeared as amazed as Sita. But just as he began to think Jolene's yelps were outnumbering her curses, Mistress Amun tried to push past the two Aes Sedai. Astonishingly, Teslin made a peremptory gesture for her to remain where she was. Very few women or men argued with an Aes Sedai's commands, but Mistress Amun gave the Red Sister a frosty look and squeezed between the two Aes Sedai, muttering something that made both of them eye her curiously. She still had to force her way between Bethamin and Sita, and he took advantage of that to land a final flurry of hard smacks, then rolled the Green Sister off his lap. His hand had begun to sting anyway. Jolene landed with a thump and let out a gasp. "Oh!" Planting herself in front of him, close enough that she interfered with Jolene's hasty scramble to her feet, Mistress Amun studied him with her arms folded beneath her breasts in a way that increased the generous cleavage displayed by her plunging neckline. Despite the dress, she was not Ibudari, not with those hazel eyes. but she had large golden hoops in her ears, a marriage knife, the hilt marked with red and white stones for her sons and daughters, dangling from a wide silver collar around her neck, and a curved dagger thrust behind her belt. Her dark green skirts were sewn up on the left side to show red petticoats. With touches of gray in her hair, she was every inch the stately Abudari innkeeper, sure of herself and accustomed to giving orders. He expected her to upbraid him. She was as good as an Aes Sedai when it came to upbraiding, so he was surprised when she spoke, sounding very thoughtful. Jolene must have tried to stop you, and Teslan and Edicina as well. But whatever they did failed. I think that means you possess a Tirangreal that can disrupt flows of the power. I've heard of such things. Catswain Maligran supposedly had one, or so rumor said. But I've never seen the like. I would very much like to. I won't try to take it away from you, but I would appreciate seeing it. How do you know Catswain? Jolene demanded, attempting to brush off the seat of her skirt. The first brush of her hand brought a wince, and she gave over with a glare for Matt just to show him she still had him in mind. Tears glistened in her big brown eyes and on her cheeks, but if he had to pay for them, it was worth the price. She said something about
I'll
the
be
test
right
of the
back.
shawl, Edicina said. She did say, after you have passed the test for the shawl, if you freeze at moments like this, Tesla added. Mistress Anand's mouth tightened for a moment, but if she was discomposed, she regained her poise in a breath. You may recall that I owned an inn, she said dryly. Many people visited the wandering woman, and many of them talked, perhaps more than they should have. No Aes Sedai would, Jolene began, then turned hurriedly. Blarick and Fenn were starting up the steps. Borderlanders both, they were big men, and Matt quickly got to his feet, ready to use his knives if necessary. They might drug him, but not without bleeding for it. Surprisingly, Jolene darted to the door and shut it tight in Fenn's face, then fastened the latch. The Saldaean made no effort to open the door, but Matt had no doubt the pair of them will be waiting when he left. When she turned around, her eyes were blazing hot, tears and all, and she seemed to have forgotten Mr. Condon for the moment. If you ever even think of, she began, shaking a finger at him. He stepped forward and stuck a finger of his own to her nose, so fast that she jumped back and bumped into the door, from which she rebounded with a squeak, spots of red blooming in her cheeks. He cared not a whisker whether that was anger or embarrassment. She opened her mouth, but he refused to let her get a word in edgewise. Except for me, you'd be wearing a demonic collar around your neck, and so would Edicina and Tesla, he said, as much heat in his voice as there was in her eyes. In return, you all try to bully me. You go your own way and endanger all of us. You bloody well channeled when you know there are Shonchan right across the road. They could have a demoni with them, or a dozen for all you know. He doubted there was even one, but doubt was not certainty, and in any case, he was not about to share his doubts with her, not now. Well, I might have to put up with some of that, though you'd better know I'm getting close to my edge. But I won't put up with you hitting me. You do that again, and I vow I'll pepper your hide twice as hard and twice as hot. My word on it. And I won't try to stop him next time if you do, Mistress Anand said. Nor I, Tesla added, echoed after a long moment by Edicina. Jolene looked as though she had been hit between the eyes with a hammer. Very satisfactory, as long as he could figure out how to avoid having his bones broken by Blarick and Fenn. Now, would someone like to tell me why you bloody decided to start channeling like it was the last battle? Do you have to keep holding them like that, Edicina? He nodded at Sita and Bethany. It was only an educated guess, but Edicina's eyes widened for a moment as if she thought his Tirangreal let him see flows of the power as well as stop them. In any case, an instant later, both women were standing normally. Bethany calmly began drying her tears with a white linen handkerchief. Sita sat down on the nearest bed, hugging herself and shivering. She looked more shaken than Bethany. None of the Aes Sedai seemed to want to answer, so Mistress Anand did it for them. There was an argument. Jolene wanted to go see these Shonchan for herself, and she wouldn't be argued out of it. Bethaman decided to discipline her, just as if she had no clue what would happen. The innkeeper shook her head in disgust. She tried to pull Jolene across her lap, with Sita helping her. and Edicina wrapped them up in flows of air. I'm assuming, she said, when the Aes Sedai all looked at her sharply. I may not be able to channel, but I do use my eyes. That doesn't account for what I felt, Matt said. There was a lot of channeling going on in here. Mistress Anand and the three Aes Sedai studied him speculatively. Long stares that seemed to probe for the medallion. They were not going to forget about his Tiranbriel, that was for sure. Jolene took up the story. Bethamin channeled. I hadn't foreseen the weave she used, but for a few moments, until she lost the source, she had sparks dancing all over the three of us. I think she may have used as much of the power as she could draw. Sobs suddenly racked Bethamin. She said, halfway to falling to the floor. I didn't mean to, she wept, shoulders shaking, face contorted. I thought you were going to kill me, but I didn't mean to. I didn't. Sita began rocking back and forth, staring at her friend in horror. Or perhaps her former friend. They both knew Adam could hold them, and maybe any Suldam, but they might well have denied the full import. Any woman who could use an Adam could learn to channel. Likely they had tried as hard as they could to deny that hard fact, to forget it. Actually channeling altered everything, however. Burning, this was all he needed on top of everything else. What are you going to do about it? Only an Aes Sedai could handle this. Now she's started, she can't just stop, I know that much. Let her die, Jessalyn said harshly. We can keep her shielded until we can be rid of her. Then she can die.
Hell yeah.
We can't do that, Edicina said, sounding almost shocked, though not apparently at the thought of Bethamin dying. Once we let her go, she'll be a danger to everyone around her.
Number one down.
I won't do it again, Bethamin wept, almost pleading. I won't. Pushing past Matt as if he were a coat rack, Jolene confronted Bethamin, staring up at the taller woman with her fists on her hips. You won't stop.
All my
You
roaches.
can't, once you begin. Oh, you
Come
may
on,
be able to
they're
go
all
once
broken
between
up.
attempts to channel, but you will try again and again, and every time your danger will increase. With a sigh, she lowered her hands. You are much too old for the novice book, but there's nothing for it. We will have to teach you. Enough to make you safe, at least.
Take a little breather.
Teach
And,
her,
ooh.
Jessalyn screeched, planting her fists on her hips. I do say let her die. Do you have any idea how these Suldam did treat me when they did have me prisoner? No, since you've never gone into detail beyond moaning over how horrible it was, Jolene replied dryly, then added in very firm tones, but I will not leave any woman to die when I can stop it. That did not end things, of course. When a woman wanted to argue, she could keep it going if she was by herself. And they all wanted to argue. Sonny joined in on Jolene's side, just as if she had as much right to speak as the Aes Sedai. Of all things, Bethamin and Sita took Teslin's part, denying any wish to learn to channel, waving their hands and arguing as loudly as anyone. Wisely, Matt took the opportunity to slip out of the wagon and pull the door shut behind him softly. No need to remind them of him. The Aes Sedai, at least, would remember soon enough. At least he could stop worrying about where the bloody Adam were, and whether the Suldam would try using them again. That was well and truly finished now. He had been right about Blerick and Fenn. They were waiting at the foot of the steps, and storm clouds were not in it for their faces. Without any doubt, they knew exactly what had happened to Jolene. But not who was to blame, it turned out. What went on in there, Cawthon? Blerick demanded, his blue eyes sharp enough to poke holes. Slightly the taller of the two, he had shaved his Shinaran topknot and was not best pleased by the growth of short hair covering his scalp. Were you involved? Fenn asked coldly. How could I have been? Matt replied, trotting down the steps as if he had not a care in the world. She's an Aes Sedai, in case you hadn't noticed. If you want to know what happened, I suggest you ask her. I'm not wolf-headed enough to talk about it, I'll tell you that. Only I wouldn't ask her right now. They're all still arguing in there. I took the chance to slip out while my hide was still intact. Not the best choice of words, perhaps. The two warders' faces grew darker still, impossible as that seemed. But they let him go on his way without having to resort to his knives. There was that. Neither seemed very eager to enter the wagon, either. Instead, they settled on the wagon's steps to wait. More fools they. He doubted Jolene would be very forthcoming with them, but she might well take out some of her temper on them because they knew. Had he been them, he would have found tasks to keep him clear of that wagon for, say a month or two. That might help. Some. Women had long memories for some things. He was going to need to watch over his shoulder for Jolene himself from now on. But it had still been worth it. With Sean Chan camped across the road and Aes Sedai arguing and women channeling as if they had never heard of the Sean Chan, and the dice spinning in his head, not even winning 2 games of stones from Tuan that night could make him feel anything but wary. He went to sleep on the floor, since it was Doman's turn to use the second bed. Eginin always got the other, with the dice bouncing off the insides of his skull, but he was sure that tomorrow had to be better than today. Well, he had never claimed to always be right. He just wished he was not quite so wrong so often. Chapter 8. Dragon's Eggs. Luca had the chauffeur breaking camp, taking down the big canvas wall and packing everything into the wagons while the sky was still dark the next morning. It was the clatter and banging of it, the shouting, that woke Matt, groggy and stiff from sleeping on the floor. As much as he could sleep, to the bloody dice. Those things gave a man dreams that slaughtered sleep. Luca was rushing about in his shirt sleeves with a lantern, giving orders and likely impeding matters as much as speeding them, but Petra, wide enough to seem squat, though he was not all that much shorter than that, paused in hitching the 4-horse team to his and Clarine's wagon to explain. With the waning moon low on the horizon and half hidden by trees, a lantern on the driver's seat gave all the light they had, a flickering pool of yellow that was repeated 100 times and more through the camp. Clarine was off walking the dogs, since they would be spending most of the day inside the wagon. Yesterday, the strong man shook his head and patted the nearest animal, patiently waiting for the last straps to be buckled, as if the horse had showed signs of nerves. Maybe he felt edgy himself. The night was only cool, not really cold, yet he was bundled up in a dark coat and had on a knitted cap. His wife worried about him falling sick from drafts or the cold, and took care that he would not. Well, we're strangers everywhere, you see, and a lot of people think they can take advantage of strangers. But if we let one man get away with it, 10 more will try, if not 100. Sometimes the local magistrate or what passes for one will uphold the law for us too, but only sometimes. Because we're strangers, tomorrow or the next day we'll be gone, and anyway, everybody knows strangers are usually up to no good. So we have to stand up for ourselves, fight for what's ours if need be. Once you do that, though, it's time to move along. Same now as when there were only a few dozen of us with Luca, counting the horse handlers. So in those days, we'd have been gone as soon as those soldiers left. In those days, there weren't so many coins to be lost by leaving in a hurry, he said dryly, and shook his head, perhaps for Luca's greed, or perhaps for how large the show had grown before going on. Those 3 Sean-Chan have friends, or at least companions who won't like their own being faced down. That standard bearer did it, but you can be sure they'll lay it to us, because they think they can hit at us, and they can't at her. Maybe their officers will uphold the law or their rules or whatever, like she did, but we can't be sure of that. What is certain, though, is that those fellows will cause trouble if we stay another day. No point to staying when it means fights with soldiers, and maybe people hurt so they can't perform, and sure trouble with the law one way or another. It was the longest speech Matt had ever heard from Petra, and the man cleared his throat as though embarrassed by saying so much. Well, he muttered, bending back to the harness, Luca will want to be on the road soon. You want to be seeing to your own horses. Matt wanted no such thing. The most wonderful thing about having coin was not what you could buy, but that you could pay others to do the work. As soon as he realized the show was preparing to move, he had rousted the 4 Red Arms from the tent they shared with Shelven, hitched the teams for his wagon and Tuan's, do as he instructed with the razor, and saddle Pips. The stout horse thief, he had not stolen the horse since Matt had known him, but that was what he was, had roused himself long enough to say that he would get up when the others returned, then rolled over in his blankets and was snoring again before Hanan and the others had their boots half on. Bannon's skills were such that no one voiced any complaint beyond the usual grumbling about the hour, and all but Harnan would have grumbled if allowed to sleep till noon. When those skills were needed, he would repay them tenfold, and they knew it. Even Fergus. The skinny red arm was none too bright except when it came to soldiering, but he was plenty smart enough there. Well, smart enough. The show left Jurador before the sun broke the horizon, a long snake of wagons rolling along the wide road through the darkness with Luca's lurid monstrosity pulled by 6 horses at its head. Tuon's wagon came just behind, with Gordarin driving, almost wide-shouldered enough to seem a strong man himself, and Tuon and Selucia, well cloaked and hooded, squeezed in on either side of him. The storage wagons and animal cages and spare horses brought up the tail. Sentries at the Shonchan camp watched them depart, silent armored figures in the night marching the camp's perimeter. Not that the camp itself was quiet. Shadowy forms stood in rigid lines among the tents while loud voices bellowed the roll call at a steady pace, and others answered. Matt all but held his breath until those regular shouts faded away behind him. Discipline was a wonderful thing. For other men, anyway. He rode Pips alongside the Aes Sedai wagon near the middle of the long line, flinching a little every time the foxhead went cool against his chest, which it began to do before they had gone much more than a mile. It seemed that Jolene was wasting no time. Bergen, handling the reins, chattered away about horses and women with Metlin. Both were as happy as pigs in clover, but then neither had any idea what was going on inside the wagon. At least the medallion only turned cool, and barely that. They were using small amounts of the power. Still, he disliked being so near any channeling at all. In his experience, Aes Sedai carried trouble in their belt pouches, and seldom were shy about scattering it, never mind who might be in the way. No, with the dice bouncing inside his head, he could have done without Aes Sedai within 10 miles. He would have ridden up beside Tuon for the chance to talk with her, no matter that Selucia and Gordarin would hear every word, but he never wanted a woman thinking you were too eager. Do that, and she either took advantage or else skittered away like a water drop on a hot greased griddle. Tuon found enough ways to take advantage already, and he had too little time for very much in the way of chasing. Sooner or later, she would speak the words that completed the marriage ceremony, sure as water was wet. But that only made it more urgent for him to find out what she was like, which had hardly been easy so far. That little woman made a blacksmith's puzzle seem simple. But how could a man be married to a woman if he did not know her? Worse, he had to make her see him as something more than toy. Marriage to a woman with no respect for him would be like wearing a shirt of black wasp nettles day and night. Worse still, he had to make her care for him, or he would find himself forced to hide from his own wife to keep her from making him Daco Vale. And to cap it off, he had to do all of that in whatever time remained before he had to send her back to Abu Dar. A fine stew, and doubtless a tasty meal for some hero out of legend, a little something to occupy his idle time before he rushed off to perform some great deed. Only Matt Bloody Coffin was no bloody hero. He still had it to do, though, and no time or room for missteps. It was the earliest start they had made yet, but his hopes that the Shonchan had frightened Luca into moving faster were soon dashed. As the sun climbed, they passed stone farm buildings clinging to hillsides, and occasionally a tiny tile or thatch-roofed village, nestled beside the road in a surround of stone-walled fields carved out of the forest, where men and women stood gaping as the show streamed past, and children ran alongside until their parents called them back. But in the mid-afternoon, the show reached something larger. Running Crossing, near a so-called river that could have been waded in fewer than 20 paces without going more than waist-deep, despite the stone bridge across it, was never a patch on Jurador, but it possessed 4 inns, each 3 stories of stone roofed in green or blue tiles, and near half a mile of hard-packed dirt between the village and the river, where merchants could park their wagons for the night. Farms, with their walled fields and orchards and pastures, made a quilt of the countryside for a good league along the road, and maybe more beyond the hills to either side of it. They certainly covered the hillsides Matt could see. That was enough for Luca. Ordering the canvas wall erected in the clearing, near to the river to make watering the animals easier, the man strutted into the village wearing coat and cloak light enough to make Matt's eyes hurt, and so embroidered with golden stars and comets that a tinker would have wept for the shame of donning the garments. The huge blue and red banner was stretched across the entrance, each wagon in its place. The performing platforms unloaded, and the wall nearly all up by the time he returned, escorting 3 men and 3 women. The village was not all that far from Abu Dar, yet their clothing might have come from another country altogether. The men wore short wool coats and bright colors embroidered with angular scroll work along the shoulders and sleeves, and dark baggy trousers stuffed into knee boots. The women, their hair in a sort of coiled bun atop their heads, wore dresses nearly as colorful as Luca's garments, their narrow skirts resplendent with flowers from hem to hips. They did all carry long belt knives, though with straight blades for the most part, and caressed the hilts whenever anybody looked at them. That much was the same. Altara was Altara when it came to touchiness. These were the village mayor, the 4 innkeepers, and a lean, leathery, white-haired woman in red. The others addressed her respectfully as mother. Since the round-bellied mayor was as white-haired as she, not to mention mostly bald, and none of the innkeepers lacked at least a little gray hair, Matt decided she must be the village wisdom. He smiled and tipped his hat to her as she passed, and she gave him a sharp look and sniffed in near perfect imitation of Nynaeve. Oh, yes, a wisdom, all right. Luca showed them around with wide smiles and expansive gestures, elaborate bows and flourishes of his cloak, stopping here and there to make a juggler or a team of acrobats perform a little for his guests. But his smile turned to a sour grimace once they were safely back on their way and out of sight. Free admission for them and their husbands and wives and all the children, he growled to Matt. And I'm supposed to pack up if a merchant comes down the road. They weren't that blunt, but they were clear enough, especially that Mother Darvale, as if this fly speck ever attracted enough merchants to fill this field. Thieves and scoundrels, Coffin. Country folk are all thieves and scoundrels, and an honest man like me is at their mercy. Soon enough, he was totting up what he might earn there despite the complimentary admissions, but he never did give over complaining entirely, even when the line at the entrance stretched nearly as far as it had in Turador. He just added complaining about how much he would have taken in with another 3 or 4 days at the Salt Town. It was 3 or 4 days now, and likely he would have lingered until the crowds had dwindled to nothing. Maybe those 3 Shongshan had been Taviran work. Not likely, but it was a pleasant way to think of it. Now that it was all in the past, it was. That was how they progressed. At best a mere 2 leagues, or perhaps 3, at an unhurried pace, and usually Luca would find a small town or a cluster of villages that he felt called for a halt. Or better to say that he felt their silver calling to him. Even if they passed nothing but fly specks, not worth the labor of erecting the wall, they never made as much as 4 leagues before Luca called a halt. He was not about to risk having the camp strung out along the road. If there was not to be a show, Luca liked to find a clearing where the wagons could be parked without too much crowding, though if driven to it, he would dicker with a farmer for the right to stop in an unused pasture, and mutter over the expense the whole
Be
next
right
day
back.
if it cost no more than a silver penny. He was tight with his purse strings, Luca was. Trains of merchants' wagons passed them in both directions, making good speed and managing to raise small clouds of dust from the hard-packed road. Merchants wanted to get their goods to market as quickly as possible. Now and then they saw a caravan of tinkers, too, their boxy wagons as bright as anything in the show except for Luca's wagon. All of them were headed toward Abu Dar, oddly enough, but then they moved as slowly as Luca. Not likely any coming the other way would overtake the show. 2 or 3 leagues a day, and the dice rattled away so that Matt was always wondering what lay beyond the next bend in the road, or what was catching him up from behind. It was enough to give a man hives. The very first night outside Runyon Crossing, he approached Ludra. Near her bright blue wagon, she had set up a small canvas enclosure 8 feet tall for launching her night flowers, and she straightened with a glare when he pulled back a flap and ducked in. A closed lantern sitting on the ground near the wall gave enough light for him to see that she was holding a dark ball the size of a large melon. Runyon Crossing was only big enough to merit a single night flower. She opened her mouth, all set to chivvy him out. Not even Luca was allowed in here. Lofting tubes, he said quickly, gesturing to the metal-bound wooden tube, as tall as he was and near enough a foot across, sitting upright in front of her on a broad wooden base. That's why you want a bell thunder, to make lofting tubes from bronze. It's the why I can't puzzle out. It seemed a ridiculous idea. With a little effort, 2 men could lift one of her lofting tubes into the wagon that carried them and her other supplies. Ron's lofting tube would require a derrick, but it was the only thing that had occurred to him. With the lantern behind her, shadows hid her expression, but she was silent for a long moment. Such a clever young man, she said thoughtfully. Her beaded braids clicked softly as she shook her head. Her laugh was low and throaty. Me? I should watch my tongue. I always get into the trouble when I make promises to clever young men. Never think I will tell you the secrets that would make you blush, though. Not now. You are already juggling 2 women, it seems, and me, I will not be juggled. Then I'm right? He was barely able to keep the incredulity from his voice. You are, she said, and casually tossed the night flower at him. He caught it with a startled oath and only dared to breathe when he was sure he had a good grip. The covering seemed to be stiff leather, with a tiny stub of fuse sticking out at one side. He had a little familiarity with smaller fireworks, and supposedly those only exploded from fire, or if you let air touch what was inside. Though he had cut one open once without it going off, yet who could say what might make a night flower erupt? The firework he had opened had been small enough to hold in one hand. Something the size of this night flower would likely blow him into ludicrous scraps. Abruptly, he felt foolish. She was not very likely to go throwing the thing if dropping it was dangerous. He began tossing the ball from hand to hand, not to make up for gasping and all that, just for something to do. How will casting lofting tubes from bronze make them a better weapon? That was what she wanted, weapons to use against the Shanshan to repay them for destroying the Guild of Illuminators. They seemed fearsome enough to me already. Eludra snatched the night flower back, muttering about clumsy oaths, and turning the ball over in her hands to examine the leather surface. Maybe it was not so safe as he had assumed. A proper lofting tube, she said, once she was sure he had not damaged the thing. It will send this close to 300 paces straight up into the sky with the right charge, and a longer distance across the ground if the tube is tilted at an angle, but not far enough for what I have in mind. A lofting charge big enough to send it further would burst the tube. For the bronze tube, I could use a charge that would send something a little smaller close to 2 miles. Making the slow match slower, to let it travel that far is easy enough.
It's a lot better than the floor.
Made of iron.
It just,
And there would be nothing for pretty colors, only the bursting.
that I don't like, which
teeth, seeing it in his
I
head,
guess isn't much of a problem, is it sits really low.
Nasty thing to be
So
receiving.
when I sit back like that,
as good as having Aes Sedai on your side.
the camera angle's
Better.
off.
Aes Sedai had to be in danger to
I
use
can't
the power
complain
as a
then.
weapon. While he had heard rumors about hundreds of Ashaman, rumors grew with every telling. Besides, if Ashaman were anything like Aes Sedai, they would start deciding where they were needed, and then
If I wasn't borrowing my brother's
began
fishing
envisioning how to
chair,
use
I'd be on the
Eludrad's
floor
bronze
still.
tube.
So
Right away, he spotted a glaring
it's
problem. All your
less
advantage was
painful
gone
than
if the
the
enemy
floor,
came from the wrong direction or got behind
which is
you,
good.
and if you needed derricks to move these things. These bronze lofting tubes, dragons, she broke in. Lofting tubes that are making the night flowers
It's
for
definitely
dividing the eye.
something
I will call them
that
dragons, and the Shanshan will howl when my dragons
it just has that
fight.
thin fabric since it's
Her
like a
tone was grim
camping
and
/
sharp
fishing
stone.
chair. So I have a
These
pillow on the
dragons,
seat,
then, whatever you call them, they'll be heavy and
so
hard
it's
to
a
move.
little bit more.
Can you mount them on
It's
wheels,
a tad more
like a
comfortable.
wagon or cart? Would they be too heavy for horses to pull?
But
She laughed again.
and it's
good
less
to see you
painful
are more
sitting
than a
here
pretty
than
face.
how it
Climbing a
was
3-step folding ladder, that put her
sitting on the
waist
floor.
nearly level with the top of the lofting tube, she set the night flower into the tube with the fuse down. It slid in a little way and stopped, the dome above the top of the tube. Hand me that, she told him, gesturing to a pole as long and thick as a quarterstaff. When he handed it up to her, she held it upright and used a leather cap on one end to push the night flower deeper. That appeared to take little effort. I have already drawn plans for the dragon carts. 4 horses could draw one easily, along with a second cart to hold the eggs. Not night flowers, dragon's eggs. You see, I had thought long and hard about how to use my dragons, not just how to make them. Pulling the capped rod from the tube, she climbed down and picked up the lantern. Come, I must make the sky bloom a little. Then I want my supper and my bed. Just outside the canvas enclosure stood a wooden rack filled with more peculiar implements, a forked stick, tongs as long as Matt was tall, other things just as odd, and all made of wood. Setting the lantern on the ground, she placed the capped pole in the rack and took a square wooden box from a shelf. I suppose now you want to learn how to make the secret powders, yes? Well, I did promise. I am the guild now, she added bitterly, removing the box's lid. It was an odd box, a solid piece of wood drilled with holes, each of which held a thin stick. She plucked out one and replaced the lid. I can decide what is secret. Better than that, I want you to come with me. I know somebody will be happy to pay for making as many of your dragons as you want. He can make every bell founder from Andor to Tyr stop casting bells and start casting dragons. Avoiding Rand's name did not stop the colors from forming inside his head and resolving for an instant into Rand, fully clothed, thank the light, talking with Loyal by lamplight in a wood-paneled room. There were other people, but the image focused on Rand, and it vanished too quickly for Matt to make out who they were. He was pretty sure that what he saw was what was actually happening right that moment, impossible as that seemed. It would be good to see Loyal again, but burning, there had to be some way to keep those things out of his head. And if he isn't interested, again the colors came, but he resisted and they melted away. I could pay to have hundreds cast myself. A lot of them, anyway. The band was going to end up fighting Sean Chan, and most likely Trollocs as well. And he would be there when it happened. There was no getting around the fact. Try to avoid it how he would, that bloody Taviran twisting would put him right in the bloody middle. So he was ready to pour out gold like water if it gave him a way to kill his enemies before they got close enough to poke holes in his hide. Eludra tilted her head to one side, pursing her rosebud lips. Who is this man with such power? There'll have to be a secret between us. Tom and Julian know, and Aganan and Doman and the Aes Sedai, Teslan and Jolene at least, and Bannon and the Red Arms, but nobody else. And I want to keep it that way. Blood and bloody ashes, far too many people knew already. He waited for her curt nod before saying, "The Dragon Reborn." The colors swirled, and despite his fighting them again, became Rand and Loyal for a moment. This was not going to be as easy as it had seemed. You know the Dragon Reborn, she said doubtfully. We grew up in the same village, he growled, already fighting the colors. This time they nearly coalesced before vanishing. If you don't believe me, ask Teslan and Jolene. Ask Tom. But don't do it around anyone else. A secret, remember? The guild has been my life since I was a girl. She scraped one of the sticks quickly down the side of the box, and the thing sputtered into flame. It smelled of sulfur. The dragons, they are my life now. The dragons in revenge on the Shom-Chan. Bending, she touched the flame to a dark length of fuse that ran under the canvas. As soon as the fuse caught, she shook the stick until the fire went out, then dropped it. With a crackling hiss, the flame sped along the fuse. I think me, I believe you. She held out her free hand. When you leave, I will go with you, and you will help me make my dragons. For a moment, as he shook her hand, he was sure the dice had stopped. But a heartbeat later, they were rattling again. It must have been imagination. After all, this agreement with Eludra might help the band, and incidentally Matt Coffin stay alive, yet it could hardly be called fateful. He would still have to fight those battles, and however you planned, however well-trained your men were, luck played its part too, bad as well as good even for him. These dragons would not change that. But were the dice bouncing as loudly? He thought not. Yet how could he be sure? Never before had they slowed without stopping. It had to be his imagination. A hollow thump came from inside the enclosure, and acrid smoke billowed over the canvas wall. Moments later, the night flower bloomed in darkness above Runnian Crossing, a great ball of red and green streaks. It bloomed again and again in his dreams that night, and for many nights after. but there it loomed among charging horsemen and massed pikes, rending flesh as he had once seen stone rent by fireworks. In his dreams, he tried to catch the things with his hands, tried to stop them, yet they rained down in unending streams on 100 battlefields. In his dreams, he wept for the death and destruction, and somehow it seemed that the rattling of the dice in his head sounded like laughter. Not his laughter, the Dark One's laughter. The next morning, with the sun just rising toward a cloudless sky, he was sitting on the steps of his green wagon, carefully scraping at the bowstay with a sharp knife. You had to be careful, almost delicate. A careless slice could ruin all your work. When Aginin and Doman came out. Strangely, they seemed to have dressed with special care, in their best, such as it was. He was not the only one to have bought cloth in Gerador, but without promises of Matt's gold to speed them, the seamstresses were still sewing for Doman and Aginin. The blue-eyed Chonchen woman wore a bright green dress heavily embroidered with tiny white and yellow flowers on the high neck and all down the sleeves. A flowered scarf held her long black wig in place. Doman, looking decidedly odd with a head of very short hair and an Ileana beard that left his upper lip bare, had brushed his worn brown coat till it actually had some semblance of neatness. They squeezed past Matt and hurried off without a word, and he thought no more of it until they returned an hour or so later to announce that they had been into the village and gotten Mother Darvale to marry them. He could not stop himself from gaping. Aginin's stern face and sharp eyes gave good indications of her character. What could have brought Doman to marry the woman? As soon Marion Bear, realizing the Ileana was beginning to glare at him, he hastily got to his feet and made a presentable bow over the bowstave. "Congratulations, Master Doman. Congratulations, Mistress Doman. The light shone on you both." What else was he to say? Doman kept glaring at him as if he had heard Matt's thoughts, though, and Aginin snorted. "My name is Lowin Shippus Coffin," she drawled. "That's the name I was given, and the name I'll die with. And a good name it is, since it helped me reach a decision I should have made weeks ago." Frowning, she looked sideways at Doman. "You do understand why I could not take your name, don't you, Bale?" "No, lass," Doman replied gently, resting a thick hand on her shoulder. "But I will take you with any name you do care to use, so long as you do be my wife. I told you that." She smiled and laid her hand atop his, and he began smiling too. Why, but the pair of them were sickening. If marriage made a man start smiling like dreamy syrup, well, not Matt Coffin. He might be as good as wed, but Matt Coffin was never going to start carrying on like a loon. And that was how he ended up in a green-striped wall tent, not very large, that belonged to a pair of lean Domani brothers who ate fire and swallowed swords. Even Tom admitted that Ballet and Avar were good, and they were popular with the other performers, so finding them places to stay was easy. That tent cost as much as the wagon had. Everybody knew he had gold to fling about, and that pair just sighed over giving up their snug home when he tried to bargain them down. Well, a new bride and groom needed privacy, and he was more than glad to give it to them, if it meant he did not have to watch them go moon-eyed at each other. Besides, he was tired of taking his turn sleeping on the floor. In the tent, at least, he had his own cot every night. Narrow and hard it might be, yet it was softer than floorboards. And with only him, he had more room than in the wagon, even after the rest of his clothes were moved in, and stowed in a pair of brass-bound chests. He had a washstand of his very own, a ladder-back chair that was not too unsteady, a sturdy stool, and a table big enough to hold a plate and cup and a pair of decent brass lamps. The chest of gold he left in the green wagon. Only a blind fool would try robbing Doman. Only a madman would try robbing Aginin. Lywin, if she insisted, though he was still certain she would regain her senses eventually. After the first night, spent close by the Aes Sedai wagon with the Foxhead cool for half the night, he had the tent set up facing Tuon's wagon by dint of making sure that the Red Arms started raising it before anyone else could claim the space. "Are you placing yourself as my guard now?" Tuon said coolly when she saw the tent for the first time. "No," he replied. "I'm just hoping for more glimpses of you." That was the light's own truth. Well, getting away from the Aes Sedai was part of it, but the other was true too. Yet the woman waggled her fingers at Selucia, and the pair of them launched into gales of giggles before recovering themselves and re-entering the faded purple wagon with all the dignity of a royal procession. Women. He was not often alone in the tent. He had taken on Lopin as his body servant after Melesian's death, and the stout tyrant with his blocky face and a beard that nearly reached his chest was always popping in to bow his balding head and ask what my lord would enjoy for his next meal, or inquire whether my lord had any need of wine or tea, or would care for a plate of candied dried figs he had vaguely acquired somewhere. Lopin was vain over his ability to find delicacies where it seemed there could be none. That, or he was rifling through the clothes chests to see whether anything needed repair or cleaning or ironing. Something always did, in his estimation, for it all looked fine to Matt. Nerim, Talmanis's melancholy body servant, frequently accompanied him, largely because the skinny gray-haired Arianan was bored. Matt could not understand how anyone could get bored with not having any work to do, but Nerim was full of dolorous comments on how poorly Talmanis must be faring without him, mournfully sighing about 5 times a day that Talmanis must have given his place to another by now, and he was ready to wrestle Lopin, if need be, for a share of the cleaning and mending. He even wanted his turn blacking Matt's boots. Noel dropped by to spin his tall tails and Oliver to play stones or snakes and foxes when he was not playing with Tuon instead. Tom came to play stones too, and to share rumors he picked up in towns and villages, knuckling his long white mustaches over the choicer bits. Julian brought his own reports, but he always brought Amathera as well. The former Panarch of Terrebonne was pretty enough for Matt to understand why the thief-catcher was interested, with a rosebud mouth just made for kissing, and she clung to Julian's arm as if she might return some of his feelings, but her big eyes always gazed fearfully toward Tuon's wagon, even when they were all inside Matt's tent. And it was still all Julian could do to keep her from dropping to her knees and putting her face to the ground whenever she glimpsed Tuon or Selucia. She did the same with Reginan, and with Bethamin and Sita besides. Considering that Amathera had been Dakovale for just a matter of months, it fair made Matt's skin crawl. Tuon could not really mean to make him Dakovale when she was going to marry him, would she? He soon told them to stop bringing him rumors about Rand. Fighting the colors in his head was too much effort, and he lost that fight as often as he won. Sometimes it was all right, but sometimes he caught glimpses of Rand and Min, and it seemed those two were carrying on something awful. Anyway, the rumors were all the same, really. The Dragon Reborn was dead, killed by Aes Sedai, by Ashiman, by the Shoanchan, by a dozen other assassins. No, he was in hiding. He was massing a secret army. He was doing some fool thing or other that varied village by village and usually inn by inn. The one thing that was clear was that Rand was no longer in Cairhien, and nobody had any idea where he was. The Dragon Reborn had vanished. It was odd how many of these old-time farmers and villagers and townsfolk seemed worried by that, as worried as the merchants passing through and the men and women who worked for them. Not one of those people knew any more of the Dragon Reborn than the tales they carried, yet his disappearance frightened them. Tom and Julian were clear on that until he made them stop. If the Dragon Reborn was dead, what was the world to do? That was the question that people asked over breakfast in the morning and ale in the evening and likely on going to bed. Matt could have told them Rand was alive. Bloody visions made him sure of that. But explaining how he knew was another matter. Even Tom and Julian seemed uncertain about the colors. The merchants and the others would have thought him a madman, and if they believed, that would only scatter rumors about him, not to mention likely setting the Shoanchan to hunting for him. All he wanted was the bloody colors out of his hand. Moving into the tent made the showfolk eye him very oddly, and small wonder. First, he had been running off with Agina, wildly if she insisted on it, and Dolman supposedly was her servant, but now she was married to Dolman, and Matt was out of the wagon entirely. Some of the showfolk seemed to think it no more than he deserved for trailing after Tuon, yet a surprising number offered him sympathy. Several men commiserated over the fickleness of women, at least they did when there were no women around, and some of the unmarried women, contortionists and acrobats and seamstresses, began eyeing him much too warmly. He might have enjoyed that if they had not been so willing to give him smoky looks right in front of Tuon. The first time that happened, he was so startled that his eyes nearly popped. Tuon seemed to find it amusing, of all things. She seemed to, but only a fool thought he knew what was in a woman's head just because she had a smile on her face. He continued to dine with her every midday, if they were halted, and began arriving for his nightly games of stones early, so she had to feed him then, too. Well, it's true. If you got a woman to feed you on a regular basis, she was halfway won. At least he dined with her when she would let him into the wagon. One night he found the latch down, and no amount of talking would make her or Solutia open the door. It seemed a bird had managed to get inside during the day, an extremely bad omen apparently.
Almost there.
Them had to spend the night in prayer and contemplation to avert some evil or other. They seemed to run half their lives according to strange superstitions. Tuon or Solutia, either one, would make odd signs with their hands if they saw a torn spider web with the spider in it. And Tuon explained to him, just as serious as if she were making sense, that the sure result of clearing away a spider web before shooing the spider out of it was the death of someone close to you within the month. They would see a flight of birds circle more than once and predict a storm, or draw a finger through a line of marching ants, count how long it took for the ants to rejoin their line, and predict how many days of fair weather lay ahead. And never mind that it did not work out that way. Oh, there was rain 3 days after the birds, crows, disturbingly enough, but it was nowhere near a storm, just a gray, drizzling day. Obviously, Solutia miscounted with the ants, Tuon said, placing a white stone on the board with that oddly graceful arching of her fingers. Solutia, watching over her shoulder in a white blouse and divided brown skirts, nodded. As usual, she wore a headscarf over her short golden hair, even indoors, a length of red and gold silk that day. Tuon was all in brocaded blue silk, a coat of odd cut that covered her hips, and divided skirts so narrow they seemed to be wide trousers. She spent considerable time giving the seamstresses detailed instructions on what she wanted sewn, and little of it was much like anything he'd ever seen before. It was all in Sean-Chan styles, he suspected, where she had had a few riding dresses sewn that would not draw comment for when she went outside. Rain pattered softly on the roof of the wagon. Obviously, what the birds told us was modified by the ants. It is never simple, Toy. You must learn these things. I will not have you ignorant. Matt nodded as if that made sense and placed his black stone, and she called his uneasiness about crows and ravens superstition. Knowing when to keep your mouth shut was a useful skill around women. Around men, too, but more so around women. You could be pretty certain what would set a man's eyes on fire. Talking with her could be dangerous in other ways, too. What do you know of the Dragon Reborn? She asked him another evening. He choked on a mouthful of wine, and the whirling colors in his brain dissipated in a fit of coughing. The wine was near enough vinegar, but even Narum had a hard time finding good wine these days. Well, he's the Dragon Reborn, he said, when he could speak, wiping wine from his chin with one hand. For a moment he saw Rand eating at a large dark table. What else is there to know? Solutia refilled his cup smoothly. A great deal, Toy. For one thing, he must kneel to the crystal throne before Tarmangaiden. The prophecies are clear on that. But I haven't even been able to learn where he is. It becomes still more urgent if he is the one who sounded the Horn of Valir, as I suspect. The Horn of Valir, he said quickly. Prophecy said it. It's been found then? It must have been, mustn't it, if it was sounded, she drawled dryly. The reports I've seen from the place where it was blown, a place called Falma, are very disturbing. Very disturbing. Securing whoever blew the horn, man or woman, may be as important as securing the Dragon Reborn himself. Are you going to play a stone or not, Toy? He played his stone, but he was so shaken that the colors whirled and faded without forming any image. In fact, he was barely able to eke out a draw from what had seemed a clear winning position. You played very poorly toward the end, Tuon murmured, frowning thoughtfully at the board, now divided evenly between the control of black stones and white. He could all but see her start trying to work out what they had been talking about when his foreplay began. Talking with her was like walking a crumbling ledge across the face of a cliff. One misstep and Matt Coffin would be as dead as last year's mutton. Only he had to walk that ledge. He had no bloody choice. Oh, he enjoyed it, in a way. The longer he spent with her, the more opportunity to memorize that heart-shaped face, to get it down so he could see her just by closing his eyes. But there was always that misstep waiting ahead. He could almost see that, too. For several days after giving her the little bunch of silk flowers, he brought her no presents, and he thought he was beginning to detect hints of disappointment when he appeared empty-handed. Then, 4 days out of Gerador, just as the sun was peeking over the horizon into a nearly cloudless sky, he got her and Lucia out of the purple wagon. Well, he just wanted Tuon, but Lucia might as well have been her shadow when it came to trying to separate them. He had commented on that once, making a joke, and both women went on talking as if he had not spoken. It was a good thing he knew Tuon could laugh at a joke, because sometimes she seemed to have no sense of humor at all. So Lucia, wrapped in a green wool cloak, with the cowl all but hiding her red headscarf, eyed him suspiciously, but then she nearly always did. Tuon never bothered with a scarf, yet the shortness of her black hair was not so apparent with the hood of her blue cloak up. "Cover your eyes, precious," he said. "I have a surprise for you." "I like surprises," she replied, placing her hands over her big eyes. For an instant she smiled in anticipation, but only for an instant. "Some surprises, Toy." That had the sound of a warning. So Lucia stood hard by her shoulder, and though the bosomy woman appeared completely at her ease, something told him she was as tense as a cat ready to leap. He suspected she did not like surprises. "Wait right there," he said, and ducked around the side of the purple wagon. When he returned, he was leading Pips and the Razor, both saddled and bridled. The mare stepped lively, frisking at the prospect of an outing. "You can look now. I thought you might like a ride." They had hours. The show might as well have been deserted for all the evidence of life among the wagons. Only a handful had smoke rising from their metal chimneys. "She's yours," he added, and stiffened as the words nearly froze in his throat. There was no doubt this time. He had said the horse was hers, and suddenly the dice were not beating so loudly in his head. It was not that they had slowed, he was sure of that. There had been more than one set rattling away. One had stopped when he made his agreement with Aludra, and another when he told Tuon the horse was hers. That was odd in itself. How could giving her a horse be fateful for him? But life had been bad enough when he had to worry about one set of dice getting one at a time. How many sets were still bouncing off the inside of his skull? How many more fateful moments were waiting to crash down on him? Tuon went immediately to the Razor, all smiles as she examined the animal as thoroughly as he had himself. She did train horses for fun, after all. Horses and Damani, the light held him. So Lucia was studying him, he realized, her expression an expressionless mask. Because of the horse, or because he had gone stiff as a post? "She's a Razor," he said, patting Pips's blunt nose. The gelding had been getting plenty of exercise, but the Razor's eagerness seemed to have infected him. "Damani bloodborne favor Razors, and it's not likely you'll ever see one outside of Eredamon. What will you name her?" "It is bad luck to name a horse before riding it," Tuon replied, taking the reins. She was still beaming. Her big eyes shone. "She's a very fine animal, Toy. A wonderful gift. Either you have a good eye, or you were very lucky." "I have a good eye, precious," he said warily. She seemed more delighted than even the Razor called for. "If you say so. Where is Lucia's mount?" "Oh, well, it had been worth a try." The smart man hedged his bets, though, so a sharp whistle brought Metlin at a trot, leading a saddled Dapple. Matt ignored the wide grin that split the man's pale face. The Kyrian and Redon had been sure he would not get away with leaving Lucia behind, but there was no need to smirk over it. Matt judged the Dapple gelding, 10 years old, to be gentle enough for Lucia. In his memory, ladies' maids seldom were more than tolerable riders. but the woman gave the animal a going over as complete as Tuon's. And when she was done, she directed a look at Matt that said she would ride the horse so as not to make a bother, but she found it decidedly lacking. Women could compress a great deal into one look. Once clear of the field where the show was camped, Tuon walked the razor along the road for a time, then took her to a trot, and then a canter. The surface was hard-packed yellow clay here, studded with edges of old paving stones. No trouble for a well-shod horse, though, and he had made sure of the razor's shoes. Matt kept Pips even with Tuon, as much for the pleasure of watching her smile as anything else. When Tuon was enjoying herself, the stern judge was forgotten, and pure delight shone on her face. Not that watching her was easy, since Alucia had the dapple between them. The yellow-haired woman was a formidable chaperone, and by the sidelong glances she gave him, her small smiles, she very much enjoyed the job of frustrating him. At the start, they had the road to themselves, except for a few farm carts, but after a while a tinker caravan appeared ahead of them, a line of garishly painted and lacquered wagons rolling slowly southward down the other side of the road with massive dogs trotting alongside. Those dogs were the only real protection tinkers had. The driver of the lead wagon, a thing as red as Luca's coats, trimmed in yellow and with violent green and yellow wheels to boot, half stood to peer toward Matt, and sat back down and said something to the woman beside him, doubtless reassured by the presence of the two women with Matt. Tinkers were a cautious lot of necessity. That whole caravan would whip up their horses and flee a single man they thought meant harm. Matt nodded to the fellow as the wagons began to pass. The lean, gray-haired man's high-collared coat was as green as his wagon's wheels, and his wife's dress was striped in shades of blue, most bright enough to suit any of the show's performers. The gray-haired man raised his hand in a wave. And Tuon suddenly turned the razor and galloped into the trees, Book streaming out behind her. In a flash, Alucia had the dapple darting after her. Snatching his hat off so as not to lose it, Matt wheeled Pips and followed. Shouts rose from the wagons, but he paid them no mind. His attention was all on Tuon. He wished he knew what she was up to. Not escape, he was sure. Likely she was just trying to make him tear out his hair. If so, she was in a fair way for succeeding. Pips quickly reeled in the dapple and left the scowling Alucia behind, flailing her mount with the reins. But Tuon and the razor kept their lead as the rolling land climbed toward hills. Startled flights of birds sprang up from beneath both animals' hooves, coveys of gray dove and of brown-speckled quail, sometimes ruffed brown grouse. All disaster needed was for the mare to be frightened by one of those. The best trained mount could rear and fall when a bird burst up underhoof. Worse, Tuon rode like a madwoman, never slowing, only swerving from her line, where the underbrush lay dense, leaping trees toppled by old storms as if she had a clue what lay on the other side. Well, he had to ride like a madman himself to keep up, though he winced every time he set Pips to jump a tree trunk. Some were near as thick as he was tall. He dug his boot heels into the gelding's flanks, urging more speed, though he knew Pips was running as hard as he ever had.
Number 2 down.
He had chosen too well in that bloody razor. Up and up they raced through the forest. As abruptly as she had begun her mad dash, Tuon reined in, well over a mile from the road. The trees were old here and widely spaced, black pines 40 paces tall, and wide-spreading oaks with branches that arched down to touch the ground before rising again, and could have been sliced crosswise into tables to seat a dozen in comfort. Thick creepers shrouded half-buried boulders and stone outcrops, but aside from that, only a few weeds pushed through the mulch. Oaks that size killed off any lesser undergrowth beneath them. "Your animal is better than he looks," the fool woman said, patting her mount's neck when he reached her. Oh, she was all innocence, just out for a pleasant ride. "Maybe you do have a good eye." With the cowl of her cloak falling down her back, her cap of short hair was visible, glistening like black silk. He suppressed a desire to stroke it. "Burn how good my eye is," he growled, clapping his hat on. He knew he should speak smoothly, but he could not have taken the roughness from his voice with a file. "Do you always ride like a moon-blinded idiot? You could have broken that mare's neck before she even got a name. Worse, you could have broken your own. I promised to get you home safely, and I mean to do just that. If you're going to risk killing yourself every time you go riding, then I won't let you ride." He wished he had those last words back as soon as they left his tongue. A man might laugh off a threat like that as a joke, maybe, if you were lucky. But a woman? Now all he could do was wait for the explosion. He expected Eludra's night flowers to pale by comparison. She raised the hood of her cloak, settling it just so. She studied him, tilting her head first one way, then the other. Finally, she nodded to herself. I name her Akain. That means swallow. Matt blinked. That was it. No eruption? I know. A good name. It suits her. What was she about now? The woman almost never did or said what he expected. What is this place, Toy? She said, frowning at the trees. Or should I say, what was it? Do you know? What did she mean? What was this place? It was a bloody forest, was what it was. But suddenly, what had seemed a large boulder right in front of him, nearly obscured by thick vines, resolved into a huge stone head, slightly tilted to one side.
I know it's on Amazon Prime. I just haven't got around to it.
The jewels in her hair. The statue
Mainly
must have been immense.
I don't know if it's
showed, her eyes and the
worth to try to see what's even good.
And that long white stone outcrop with an oak tree's roots growing over it was a piece of a spiral column. All around them now he could make out bits of columns and large worked stones.
Or is it?
Claiming to have been part of some grand structure, and what had to be a stone sword 2 spans long, all half buried. Still, ruins of cities and monuments could be found in many places, and few even among Aes Sedai had any idea what they had been. Opening his mouth to say that he did not know, he caught sight through the trees of 3 tall hills in a row, perhaps another mile on. The middle hill had a cleft top, like a wedge cut cleanly out, while the hill on the left had 2. And he knew. There could hardly be 3 hills exactly like that anywhere else.
Oh, have you?
Those hills have been called the Dancers, when this place had been Pt.4, the capital city.
I've tried some of the Fallouts.
The road behind them had been
just more than one I could get into, but I'm not very good at any of the
people have said that the artistry in stone that the Ogier had practiced in Tar Valon, they had perfected in Pt.4. Of course, the people of every Ogier-built city had claimed their own outdid Tar Valon, confirming Tar Valon as the touchstone. He had a number of memories of the city, dancing at a ball in the Palace of the Moon, carousing in soldiers' taverns where veiled dancers writhed, watching a procession of flutes during the blessing of the swords. But oddly, he had another memory of those hills. Near 500 years after the Trollocs left no stone standing among Pt.4, and Daharon died in blood and fire. Why it had been necessary for Naravan and his Sandara to invade Shiota, as the land was then, he did not know. Those old memories were fragments, however long a time anyone covered, and full of gaps. He had no idea why those hills had been called the Dancers either, or what the blessing of the swords was. But he remembered being an Essendown lord in a battle fought among these ruins. He remembered having those hills in view when he took an arrow through his throat. He must have fallen no more than half a mile from the very spot where he sat Pips, drowning in his own blood. I hate to remember dying, he thought, and the thought turned to a coal burning in his brain, a coal that burned hotter and hotter. He remembered those men's deaths, not just one, but dozens of them. He remembered dying. Toy, are you ill? Tuan brought the mare close and peered up into his face. Concern filled her big eyes. You've gone pale as the moon. I'm right as spring water, he muttered. She was close enough for him to kiss if he bent his head, but he did not move. He could not. He was thinking so furiously he had nothing left for motion. Somehow, only the light knew, the eel thing, had gathered the memories they had planted in his head. How could they harvest memory from a corpse? A corpse in a world of men, at that. He was certain they never came to this side of that twisted door-framed Tir-on-Briol for longer than minutes at a time. A way occurred to him, one he did not like, not a scrap. Maybe they created some sort of link to any human who visited them, a link that allowed them to copy all of the man's memories after that, right up to the moment he died. In some of those memories from other men, he was white-haired. In some, only a few years older than he really was, and everything in between. But there were none of childhood or growing up. What were the odds of that if they had just stuffed him with random bits and pieces, likely things they considered rubbish or had done with? What did they do with memories anyway? They had to have some reason for gathering them.
It's going through right now, seeing
no, he was just trying to avoid where
what games they have for the Nintendo Switch too.
They had to be. It was the only explanation that made
I
sense.
got this from errands where you pay month by month. But when I got it from them, it ended up being the only reason I got it from them is because it was advertised on their website, and they had a sign at the store advertising it that the Switch 2 came with that was it Mario Kart World? That new Mario Kart. And when I got it, it wasn't that edition, so it was pretty much just the system, not the system and the game. So,
but then she had taken the time in catching up.
I'm still going to keep it because I'll eventually get some games for it because I like the Switch because I had an old one that I ended up getting rid of. But I'm a little disappointed they didn't come with the game.
Following us with dogs.
So I'm just looking to see what
soon.
Free games they have or what games they have that I can put on my watch list that I can save up for. The only thing I got is it's supposed to come with the game.
No need to try.
Whether it been Mario Kart or any other game, I would have been happy with.
Those people are tinkers.
Mario Kart, it would have been okay.
And they're no danger to anybody.
Because there's Mario
they couldn't
Kart.
be violent if their lives depended.
I'm not too good at racing games,
no
but it would have been something to play.
But they saw you two go herring off trying to get away from me, as it must have seemed. And me
I would have been happy with it came with any
now that
game.
those dogs have a
But yeah,
the tinkers will follow
I asked him about it.
Need be to make sure you two
I hit him up about it, told him about how on the website
to save the time and trouble.
Looking up online, like how you could do it online and whatnot. And even the store display had a cardboard display advertising that the Switch 2s they have are the ones that come with Mario Kart World. But they said that he says he apologized for it and whatnot, but he said that they had the advertising up for him, but he said he said that they never sent him the Mario Kart edition of it. So he sent him a
red and blue striped coat, baggy yellow trousers, into knee boots, or a violet colored coat above red trousers, or worse. Some women.
It's hooked up to my TV too. See, that's the game it was supposed to come with. But it's like an $80 game.
A fair number had shawls as well. They had more colors to the eye-scrambling blend.
I know how many sound, but I'd rather have a Pokemon game instead of the Mario Kart one, just because I played Pokemon since the original Game Boy.
The Tinkers stopped at that.
See, I still have and play Pokemon Go on my phone.
And the people came on more slowly. None carried so
but even if I wanted to get a Pokemon one, that's
the men clustered
like $60.
Around Tuon and Solutia. There was no threat in it, but as easily as that, Tuon and Solutia were separated from him, off where the Tinker women could make inquiries.
Because I even have another Game Boy DS that has Super Mario World on it.
Solutia could ride off while he was trying
but you can't go wrong with any type of Mario.
So he could not climb into the saddle. That was all they would do, but unless he was willing
to even some of the Mario games are
hours maybe to give that pair time
expensive.
escape.
At least
The
on
gray-haired man
here,
bowed with his hands pressed
like
to
any
his
other
chest.
game, it could be about
Peace
50,
be on
60
you
bucks.
and yours, my lord. Forgiveness if we
That,
intrude.
or if it's on a
But we
Nintendo
fear our
or a
dogs
Switch,
have
you can't
frightened
go wrong with
Matt
a
responded
Zelda
with a bow
game
in the
either.
same fashion.
Mario,
Peace
Zelda.
be on you always, Seeker, and on all the people. The ladies' horses weren't frightened. The ladies are impetuous at times.
You could get Assassin's Creed
What was the woman
Shadows
saying? You tried to eavesdrop.
for the
Their
Nintendo
voices were
DS.
low murmurs.
Or for the Nintendo Switch too.
You know something of the people, my lord? The Seeker sounded surprised and had a right to. The Tuathalan kept away from anywhere larger than a moderate-sized village. They would seldom encounter anyone in a silk coat. Only a little, Matt replied. A very little. He had memories of meeting tinkers, but he himself had never spoken to one before. What were those bloody women saying? Will you answer me a question? I've seen a number of your caravans the past few days, more than I'd have expected to, and all heading toward Abu Dar. Is there a reason? The man hesitated, darting a glance toward the women. They were still murmuring away, and he had to be wondering why their conversation was lasting so long. After all, it only needed a moment to say, yes, I need help, or the opposite. It is the people called Shan-Chan, my lord, he said finally. Word is spreading among the people that there is safety where the Shan-Chan rule, and equal justice for all. Elsewhere, you understand, my lord. Matt did. Like the showfolk, tinkers were strangers wherever they went, and worse, strangers with an undeserved reputation for thievery. Well, they stole them more often than anyone else, and a deserved one for trying to entice young people into joining them. And on top of it, for tinkers, there was no question of fighting back if anybody tried to rob them or chase them away. Take care, Seeker. Their safety comes at a price, and some of their laws are harsh. You know what they do with women who can channel? Thank you for your concern, my lord, the man said calmly. But few of our women ever begin channeling, and if one does, we will do as we always do, and take her to Tavan. Abruptly, the women began laughing. Great gales and peals. The Seeker relaxed visibly. If the women were laughing, Matt was not the kind of man who would strike them down or kill them for getting in his way. For Matt's part, he scowled. There was nothing in that laughter that he liked. The tinkers made their departure with more apologies from the Seeker for having bothered them, but the women kept looking back and laughing behind cupped hands. Some of the men leaned close as they walked, plainly asking questions, but the women just shook their heads and looked back again, laughing. What did you tell them? Matt asked sourly. Oh, that's none of your business, now is it, Toy? Tuan replied, and Salusha laughed. Oh, she bloody cackled, she did. He decided he was better off not knowing. Women just purely enjoyed planting needles in a man. Chapter 9. A Short Path. Tuan and Salusha were not the only women who caused Matt trouble, of course. Sometimes it seemed that most of the trouble in his life came from women, which he could not understand at all, since he always tried to treat them well. Even Aginin gave her share of grief, though it was the smallest share. I was right. You do think you can marry her, she drawled when he asked her for help with Tuan. She and Doman were seated on the steps of their wagon with their arms around each other. A trickle of smoke rose from Doman's pipe. It was mid-morning on a fine day, though gathering clouds threatened rain for later, and the performers were putting on their acts for the inhabitants of 4 small villages that combined perhaps equaled Running and Crossing in size. Matt had no desire to go watch. Though he still enjoyed watching the contortionists, and better still the female acrobats and tumblers, but when you saw jugglers and fire-eaters and the like every day just about, even Mayora and her leopards
Another
became,
good one that used to be on Nintendo was
not exactly
Donkey Kong.
Never you mind what I think again. Will you tell me what you know of her? Trying to find out from her is like fishing blindfolded and barehanded in a briar patch trying to catch a rabbit. My name is Lyle Cotton. Don't forget it again, she said in tones suitable for giving orders on a ship's deck. Her eyes tried to drive the command home like blue hammers. Why should I help you? You aim too high above yourself, a mole yearning for the sun. You could face execution for simply saying you want to marry her. It's disgusting. Besides, I've left all that behind me.
I gotta try to come up with, where is it?
Dillman gave her a one-armed hug.
A little bit over $60 to get the game.
If you've left all that behind you, what do you care how disgusting my wanting to marry her is? There. It was out in the open. Partly, at least. Dillman removed the pipe from his mouth long enough to blow a smoke ring aimed at Matt's face. If she doesn't want to help you, then give over. He gave it that same ship's deck voice of command. Again muttered under her breath. She appeared to be arguing with herself. Finally, she shook her head. No, Bill, he's right. If I'm cast adrift, then I have to find a new ship and a new course. I can never return to Shan-Chan, so I might as well cut the cable and be done with it. What she knew of Tuan was mainly rumor. It seemed the imperial family lived their lives behind walls even when in plain sight, and only whispers of what went on behind those walls escaped. Yet those were sufficient to make the hair on the back of Matt's neck stand up. His wife-to-be had had a brother and a sister assassinated? After they tried to have her killed, true, but still. What kind of family went around killing one another? The Shan-Chan blood and the imperial family, for starters. Half of her siblings were dead, assassinated, most of them, and maybe the others, too.
Not too easy.
Lyle Wynn had to tell, was generally known among Shan-Chan.
They'll eventually have
hardly more comforting. Tuan would have been schooled in intrigue from infancy, schooled in weapons and fighting with her bare hands, heavily guarded, yet expected to be her own last line of defense. All of those born to the blood were taught to dissemble, to disguise their intentions and ambitions. Power shifted constantly among the blood, some climbing higher, others slipping down, and the dance was only faster and more dangerous in the imperial family. The Empress, she started to add, may she live forever, and half choked and swallowing the words, then closed her eyes for a long moment before continuing. The Empress had borne many children, as every Empress did, so that among those who survived there would be one fit to rule after her. It would not do to have someone who was stupid or a fool ascend the crystal throne. Tuan was accounted very far from either. Right. The woman he was to marry was as bad as water and Aes Sedai wrapped into one, and maybe as dangerous. He had several conversations to begin. He was careful to name her Lyle into her face, lest she go for him with her dagger. Yet he thought of her as a Guinan, trying to learn more, but her knowledge of the blood was largely from the outside looking in, and her knowledge of the imperial court, by her own admission, little better than that of a street urchin in Chandar. The day he gave Tuan the mare, he had ridden alongside a Guinan's wagon, having one of those fruitless conversations. He had accompanied Tuan in solution for
the actual
time,
price there was like
$69.99, then exchanging glances and giggling over what they had told the tinkerwomen without a sliver of doubt. A man could only take so much of that sort of thing. A clever gift, that mare, the Guinan said, leaning out from the driver's seat to look up the line of wagons. Dillman was handling the reins. She took her turn sometimes, but handling a team was not among the skills she had learned on ships. How did you know? Know what? He asked. She straightened and adjusted her wig. He did not know why she continued to wear the thing. Her own black hair was short, but no shorter than Solution's. About courting gifts. Among the blood, when you are courting someone higher than you, a traditional gift is something exotic or rare. Best of all is if you can connect the gift somehow to one of the recipient's pleasures. And it's well known the High Lady loves horses. It's good you've acknowledged that you don't expect to be her equal, too. Not that this is going to work, you understand. I don't have a clue why she's still here. Now you've stopped guarding her, but you can't believe she'll actually say the words. When she marries, it will be for the good of the Empire, not because some layabout like you gave her a horse or made her a smile. Matt ground his teeth to keep from shouting a curse. He had acknowledged what? No wonder a set of bloody dice had stopped. Tuan would let him forget this when it snowed on Sunday. He was certain sure of that. If Lyle, when bloody shipless, gave him small griefs, the Aes Sedai managed larger. Aes Sedai liked nothing better. He was resigned to them traipsing about every village and town they stopped at, asking questions and doing a light knew what else. He had no choice but resignation, with no way to stop them. They claimed to be taking care, at least Tesla and Edicina did. Jolene snapped that he was a fool for worrying, yet an Aes Sedai taking care was still clearly a woman of consequence, whether or not anybody recognized what she was. Lacking the coin for silks, they had purchased bolts of fine wool and Jurador, and the seamstresses worked as hard for Aes Sedai as they did for Matt's gold. So they strolled about dressed like wealthy merchants and as sure of themselves as any noble ever born. Nobody saw one of them walk 5 strides without knowing that she expected the world to conform itself to her. 3 women like that, with a traveling show at that, were sure to cause talk. At least Jolene left her great serpent ring in her belt pouch. The other 2 had lost theirs to the Seanchan. If Matt had seen Jolene with the thing actually on her finger, he thought he would have wept. He got no more reports on their activities from the former Suldam. Jolene had Bethaman firmly in hand. The tall, dark woman ran when Jolene said run and jumped when she said toad. Edicina was giving her lessons too, but Jolene considered Bethaman a personal project for some reason. She was never harsh, that Matt saw, not after the face slapping, but you might have thought she was getting Bethaman ready to go to the tower. Bethaman returned a sort of gratitude that made it clear her loyalties had shifted. As for Sita, the yellow-haired woman was so frightened of his sister that she did not dare follow him any longer. She actually shivered when he suggested it. Strange as it seemed, Sita and Bethaman had been so accustomed to how Seanchan women of Channel saw themselves that they had really believed Aes Sedai could not be much different. They were dangerous when off the leash, yet dangerous dogs could be handled by someone who knew how, and they were experts with that particular sort of dangerous dog. Now they knew that Aes Sedai were not dogs of any kind. They were wolves. Sita would have found another place to sleep had that been possible, and he learned from Mistress Hanan that the Seanchan woman put her hands over her eyes whenever Jolene or Edicina was teaching Bethaman in the wagon. I'm certain she can see the weaves, Satala said. He would have said she sounded envious, except that he doubted she envied anyone. She's halfway to admitting it if she wouldn't hide her eyes. Sooner or late, she'll come around and want to learn too. Maybe she did sound envious at that. He could have wished for Sita to come around soon rather than late. Another student would have left the Aes Sedai less time to trouble him. If the show was halted, he could hardly turn around without seeing Jolene or Edicina peering around the corner of a tent or wagging at him. Usually, the fox head cooled on his chest. He could not prove they were actually channeling at him, yet he was certain of it. He was unsure which of them found the loophole in his protection that Adelius and Van Dien had, that something thrown with the power would hit him, but after that he could barely leave his tent without getting hit by a rock and later by other things, burning sparks like a shower from a forge fire, stinging sparks that made him leap and his hair try to stand on end. He was positive that Jolene was behind it. If for no other reason, he never saw her without Blerick and Fen, or both, nearby for protection. And she smiled at him like a cat smiling at a mouse. He was planning how to get her alone. It was that or spend his time hiding from her. When she and Tesla got into a shouting match that cleared Edicina out of the whitewashed wagon almost as quickly as Bethaman and Sita. And those 2 ran out and stood gaping at the wagon. The yellow sister calmly went back to brushing her long black hair, lifting it up with one hand and sweeping the wooden hairbrush down it with the other. Seeing that, she smiled at him without ceasing the motions of her brush. The medallion went cold, and the shouting vanished as though cut off by a knife. He never learned what was behind that power-woven shield. Tesla favored him somewhat, yet when he asked her, she gave him one of those looks in silence. It was Aes Sedai business and none of his. Whatever had gone on in there, though, The rocks stopped and the sparks. He tried thanking Teslin, but she was having none of it. When something be no to be spoken of, it be no to be spoken of, she told him firmly. It would be well for you to learn that lesson if you are to be around sisters. And I think your life be tied to Aes Sedai, now if it was no before. Bloody thing for her to say. She never cracked her teeth about his Tirangriel, but the same could not be said of Jolene and Edicina, even after the argument. They tried to bully him into handing it over every single day, Edicina cornering him by herself, Jolene with her warders glowering over her shoulders at him. Tirangriel were rightfully the property of the White Tower. Tirangriel needed proper study, particularly one with the odd properties this one possessed. Tirangriel were potentially dangerous, too much so to be left in the hands of the uninitiated. Neither said especially a man's hands, but Jolene came close. He began to worry that the Green would have Blerick and Fenn simply take it from him. That pair still suspected he had been involved in what had happened to her, and the dark looks they gave him said they wanted any excuse to beat him like a drum. That would be stealing, Mistress Anand told them in a lecturing tone, gathering her cloak around her. The sunlight was beginning to fade, and coolness already setting in. They were standing outside Tuon's wagon, and he was hoping to get inside in time to be fed. Noel and Ova were already inside. Satala was apparently off to visit the Aes Sedai, something she did frequently. Tower law is quite clear on that. There might be considerable discussion over whether it had to be given back to you. I rather think it would not be, in the end. But Jolene would face a fairly harsh penance for theft all the same. Maybe she'd think it worth a penance, he muttered. His stomach rumbled. The potted finches and creamed onions that Lopeland had presented proudly for his midday meal had both turned out to be spoiling, to the tyrant's extreme mortification, which meant Nat had had a heel of bread since breakfast and no more. You know an awful lot about the White Tower. What I know, Lord Matt, is that you've made just about every misstep a man can make with Aes Sedai, short of trying to kill one. The reason I came with you in the first place, instead of going with my husband, half the reason I'm still here is to try to keep you from making too many missteps. Truth to tell, I don't know why I should care, but I do, and that's that. If you would let yourself be guided by me, you'd not be in trouble with them now. I can't say how much I can recover for you, not now, but I am still willing to try. Matt shook his head. There were only two ways to deal with Aes Sedai without getting burned: let them walk all over you or stay away from them. He would not do the first, and could not do the second. So he had to find a third way, and he doubted it could come from following Satala's advice. Women's advice about Aes Sedai generally was to follow the first path, though they never worded it that way. They talked of accommodation. But it was never the Aes Sedai who was expected to do any accommodating. Half the reason. What's the other? He grunted as though he had been punched in the stomach. Tuon? You think I can't be trusted with Tuon? Mistress Anand laughed at him, a fine, rich laugh. You are a rogue, my lord. Now, some rogues make fine husbands once they've been tamed a little around the edges. My Jasper was a rogue when I met him. But you still think you can nibble a pastry here, nibble a pastry there, and dance off to the next. There's no dancing away from this one, Matt said, frowning up at the wagon door. The dice clicked away in his head. Not for me. He was not sure he really wanted to dance away anymore, but want and wish as he might, he was well and truly caught. Like that, is it? She murmured. Oh, you've chosen a fine one to break your heart. That's as may be, Mistress Anand. I have my reasons. I'd better get inside before they eat everything. He turned toward the steps at the back of the wagon, and she laid a hand on his arm. Could I see it? Just to see? There was no doubt what she meant. He hesitated, then fished in the neck of his shirt for the leather cord that held the medallion. He could not have said why. He had refused Jolene and Edicina even a glimpse. It was a fine piece of work, a silver fox head nearly as big as his palm. Only one eye showed, and enough daylight remained to see, if you looked close, that the pupil was half shaded to form the ancient symbol of Aes Sedai. Her hand trembled slightly as she traced a finger around that eye. She had said she only wanted to see it, but he allowed the touching. She breathed down a long sigh. "You were Aes Sedai once," he said quietly, and her hand froze. She recovered herself so quickly that he might have imagined it. She was stately Satala Anand, the innkeeper from Abu Dar, with the big golden hoops in her ears and the marriage knife dangling hilt down into her round cleavage, about as far from an Aes Sedai as could be. "The sisters think I'm lying about never having been to the tower. They think I was a servant there as a young woman and listened where I shouldn't have. I haven't seen you looking at this." He bounced the fox head once on his hand before tucking it safely back under his shirt. She pretended not to care, and he pretended not to know she was pretending. Her lips twitched into a brief, rueful smile, as if she knew what he was thinking. "The sisters would see it if they could let themselves," she said, as simply as if she were discussing the chances of rain. "But I said I expect that when certain things happen, the woman will go away decently and die soon after. I went away, but Jasper found me half-starved and sick on the streets of Abu Dar and took me to his mother." She chuckled, just a woman telling how she met her husband. "He used to take in stray kittens, too. Now you know some of my secrets, and I know some of yours. Shall we keep them to ourselves?" "What secrets of mine do you know?" he demanded, instantly wary. Some of his secrets were dangerous to have known, and if too many knew of them, they were not really secrets anymore. Mistress Anand glanced at the wagon, frowning. "That girl is playing a game with you as surely as you are playing one with her. Not the same game that you are. She's more like a general plotting a battle than a woman being courted. If she learns you're moonstruck with her, though, she'll still gain the advantage. I'm willing to let you have an even chance, or as near to one as any man has with a woman of any brains. Do we have an agreement?" "We do," he replied fervently. "That we do." He would not have been surprised if the dice stopped then, but they went on bouncing. Had the sisters' fixation on his medallion been the only problem they gave him, had they contented themselves with creating rumors everywhere the show stopped, he could have said those days were no more than tolerably bad for traveling with Aes Sedai. Unfortunately, by the time the show departed Jurador, they had learned who Tuon was. Not that she was the daughter of the Nine Moons, but that she was a Shan-Chan high lady, someone of rank and influence. "Do you take me for a fool?" Luca protested when Matt accused him of telling him. He squared up beside his wagon, fists on his hips, a tall man full of indignation and ready to fight over it by his glare. "That's a secret I want buried deep until she says I can use that warrant of protection. That won't be much use if she revokes it because I told something she wants hidden." But his voice was a shade too earnest, and his eyes shifted a hair from meeting Matt's directly. The truth of it was, Luca liked to boast nearly as much as he liked gold. He must have thought it was safe, to tell the sisters, and only realized the snarl he had created after the words were out of his mouth. A snarl it was, as tangled as a pit full of snakes. The High Lady Tuon, readily at hand, presented an opportunity no Aes Sedai could have resisted. Teslin was every bit as bad as Jolene and Edicina. The three of them visited Tuon in her wagon daily, and descended on her when she went out for a walk. They talked of truces and treaties and negotiations, tried to learn what connection she had to the leaders of the invasion, attempted to convince her to help arrange talks to end the fighting. They even offered to help her leave the show and return home. Unfortunately for them, Tuon did not see three Aes Sedai, representatives of the White Tower, perhaps the greatest power on Earth, not even after the seamstresses began delivering their riding clothes, change out of the ragbag leavings might have been able to find for them. She saw two escaped Damani and lost Damani, and she had no use for either until they were decently collared. Her phrase, that. When they came to her wagon, she latched the door, and if they managed to get inside before she could, she left. When they cornered her or tried to, she walked around them, the same as walking around a stump. They all but talked themselves hoarse, and she refused to listen. Any Aes Sedai could teach a stone patience if she had reason, yet they were unaccustomed to flat being ignored. Matt could see the frustration growing, the tight eyes and tighter mouths that took longer and longer to relax, the hands gripping skirts and fists to keep them from grabbing Tuon and shaking her. It all came to a head sooner than he expected, and not at all in the way he had imagined. The night after he gave Tuon the mare, he ate supper with her and Solusha, and with Noel and Alper, of course. Bear managed as much time with Tuon as he did. Lopin and Naren, as formal as if they were in a palace instead of squeezed for room to move, served a typical early spring meal, stringy mutton with peas that had been dried and turnips that had sat too long in somebody's cellar. It was too early yet for anything to be near harvesting. Still, Lopin had made a pepper sauce for the mutton, Naren had found pine nuts for the peas. There was plenty to go around, and nothing tasted off, so it was as fine a meal as could be managed. Oliver left once supper was done, having already had his games with Tuon, and Matt changed places with Solusha to play stones. Noel remained too, despite any number of telling looks, rambling on about the Seven Towers and dead Melkir, which apparently had overtopped anything in Cairhien and Shol Arbella, the city of 10,000 bells in Arafel, and all manner of borderland wonders, strange spires made of crystal harder than steel, and a metal bowl 100 paces across set into a hillside and the like. Sometimes he interjected comments on Matt's play, that he was exposing himself on the left, that he was setting a fine trap on the right, and just with Tuon before he'd fall into it. That sort of thing. Matt kept his mouth shut except for chatting with Tuon, though it took gritting his teeth more than once to accomplish. Tuon found Noel's natter entertaining. He was studying the board, wondering whether he might have a small chance of gaining a draw, when Jolene led Teslin and Edicina into the wagon, like haughty on a pedestal, smooth-faced Aes Sedai without toenails. Jolene was wearing her great serpent ring, squeezing by Solusha, giving her very cold looks. When she was slow to move aside, they arrayed themselves at the foot of the narrow table. Noel went very still, eyeing the sisters sideways, one hand beneath his coat, as if the fool thought his knives would do any good here. "There must be an end to this, High Lady," Jolene said, ignoring Matt. She was telling, not pleading, announcing what would be because it had to be. "Your people have brought a war to these lands such as we have not seen since the War of the 100 Years, perhaps not since the Trollic Wars. Tarmangaiden is approaching, and this war must end before it comes, lest it bring disaster to the whole world. It threatens no less than that. So there will be an end to your petulance. You will carry our offer to whoever commands among you. There can be peace until you return to your own lands across the sea, or you can face the full might of the White Tower, followed by every throne from the borderlands to the Sea of Storms. The Amarlin seat has likely summoned them against you already. I have heard of vast borderland armies already in the south, and other armies moving. Better to end this without more bloodshed, though. So avert your people's destruction and help bring this peace." Matt could not see Edicina's reaction, but Teslin simply blinked. For an Aes Sedai, that was as good as a gasp. Maybe this was not exactly what she had expected Jolene to say. For his part, he groaned under his breath. Jolene was no Grey, as deft as a skilled juggler in negotiations, that was for sure, but neither was he. And he still figured she had found a short path to putting Tuon's back up. But Tuon folded her hands in her lap beneath the table and sat very straight, looking right through the Aes Sedai. Her face was as stern as it had ever been for him. "Solusha," she said quietly. Moving up behind Teslin, the yellow-haired woman bent long enough to take something from beneath the blanket Matt was sitting on. As she straightened, everything seemed to happen all at once. There was a click, and Teslin screamed, clapping her hands to her throat. The fox head turned to ice against Matt's chest, and Jolene's head whipped around with an incredulous stare for the red. Edicina turned and ran for the door, which swung half open and slammed shut. Slammed against Blerick or Fen by the sound of men falling down the wagon's steps. Edicina jerked to a halt and stood very stiffly, arms at her sides and divided skirts pressed against her legs by invisible cords. All that in moments, and Selucia had not stayed still. She bent briefly to the bed Noel was sitting on and snapped the silver collar of another Adam around Jolene's neck. Matt could see that was what Teslin was gripping with both hands. She was not trying to take it off, just holding on to it, but her knuckles were white. The red's narrow face was an image of despair, her eyes staring and haunted. Jolene had regained the utter calm of an Aes Sedai, but she did touch the segmented collar encircling her neck. "If you think you can," she began, then cut off abruptly, her mouth going tight. An angry light shone in her eyes. "You see, the Adam can be used to punish, though that is seldom done." Tuan stood, and she had the bracelet of an Adam on each wrist, the gleaming leashes snaking away under the blankets on the beds. How in the light had she managed to get her hands on those? "No," Matt said. "You promised not to harm my followers, Precious." Maybe not the wisest thing to use that name now, but it was too late to call it back. "You've kept your promises so far. Don't go back on one now." "I promise not to cause dissension among your followers, Toy," she said sniffily. "And in any case, it is very clear that these three are not your followers." The small sliding door used to talk to whoever was driving or pass out food slid open with a loud bang. She glanced over her shoulder, and it slid shut with a louder. A man cursed outside and began beating at the door. "The Adam can also be used to give pleasure as a great reward," Jack told Jolene, ignoring the behind her. Jolene's lips parted, and her eyes grew very wide. She swayed, and the rope-suspended table swung as she caught herself with both hands to keep from falling. If she was impressed, though, she hit it well. She did move her dark gray skirts once after she was upright again, but that might have meant nothing. Her face was all Aes Sedai composure. Edicina, looking over her shoulder, matched that calm gaze, although she now wore the third Adam around her neck. And come to it, her face was paler than usual, but Teslin had begun weeping silently, shoulders shaking, tears leaking down her cheeks. Noel was tensed, a man ready to do something stupid. Matt kicked him under the table, and when the man glared at him, he shook his head. Noel's scowl deepened, but he took his hand out of his coat and leaned back against the wall. Still glaring. Well, let him. Knives were no use here, but maybe words could be. Much better if this could be ended with words. "Listen," Matt said to Tuan. "If you think, you'll see 100 reasons this won't work. Why, you can learn to channel yourself. Doesn't knowing that change anything? You're not far different from many." You might as well have turned to smoke and blown away for all the attention she paid. "Try to embrace Saidar," she drawled, stern eyes steady on Jolene. Her voice was quite mild in comparison to her gaze, yet plainly she expected obedience. Obedience? She looked a bloody leopard staring at 3 tethered goats. And strangely, more beautiful than ever. A beautiful leopard who might rake him with her claws as soon as the goats. Well, he had faced a leopard a few times before this, and those were his own memories. There was an odd sort of exhilaration that came with confronting a leopard. "Go ahead," she went on. "You know the shield is gone." Jolene gave a small grunt of surprise, and Tuan nodded. "Good. You've obeyed for the first time, and learned that you cannot touch the power while you wear the Adam unless I wish it. But now I wish you to hold the power, and you do, though you didn't try to embrace it." Jolene's eyes widened slightly, a small crack in her calm. "And now," Tuan went on, "I wish you not to be holding the power, and it is gone from you. Your first lessons." Jolene drew a deep breath. She was beginning to look, not afraid, but uneasy. "Blood and bloody ashes, woman," Matt growled. "Do you think you can parade them around in those leashes without anyone noticing?" A heavy thump came from the door. A second produced the sound of cracking wood. Whoever was beating at the wooden window was still at it too. Somehow that caused no sense of urgency. If the warders got in, what could they do? I will house them in the wagon they are using and exercise them at night, she snapped irritably. I am nothing like these women, Toy. Nothing like them. Perhaps I could learn, but I choose not to, just as I choose not to steal or commit murder. That makes all the difference. Recovering herself with visible effort, she sat down with her hands on the table, focused on the Aes Sedai once again. I've had considerable success with one woman like you. Edicina gasped, murmured a name too low to be caught. Yes, Tuan said. You must have met my Mylan in the kennels or at exercise. I will train you all as well as she is. You have been cursed with a dark taint, but I will teach you to have pride in the service you give the Empire. I didn't bring these three out of Abu Dar so you could take them back, Matt said firmly, sliding himself along the bed. The foxhead grew colder still, and Tuan made a startled sound. How did you do that, Toy? The weave melted when it touched you. It's a gift, precious. As he stood up, Selucia started toward him, crouching, her hands outstretched and pleading. Fear painted her face. You must not, she began. No, Tuan said sharply. Selucia straightened and backed away, though she kept her eyes on him. Strangely, the fear vanished from her expression. He shook his head in wonder. He knew the bosomy woman obeyed Tuan instantly. She was Sojin, after all, as much owned as Tuan's horse.
I'll be right back.
She actually thought that right and good. But how obedient did you need to be to lose your fear of an order? They have annoyed me, Toy, Tuan said as he put his hands on Teslin's collar. Still trembling, tears still streaming down her cheeks, the red looked as though she could not believe he would actually remove the thing. They annoy me, too. Placing his fingers just so, he pressed, and the collar clicked open. Teslin seized his hands and began kissing them. Thank you, she wept over and over. Thank you, thank you. Matt cleared his throat. You're welcome, but there's no need for it. Would you stop that? Teslin, reclaiming his hands, took some effort. I want them to stop annoying me, Toy, Tuan said as he turned to Jolene. From anyone else, that might have been petulant. The dark little woman made it a demand. I think they'll agree to that after this, he said dryly. But Jolene was looking up at him with a stubborn set to her jaw. You will agree, won't you? The Green said nothing. I do agree, Teslin said quickly. We do all agree. Yes, we all agree, Edicina added. Jolene stared at him silently, stubbornly, and Matt sighed. I could let Precious keep you for a few days until you change your mind. Jolene's collar clicked open in his hands. But I won't. Still staring into his eyes, she touched her throat as though to confirm the collar was gone. Would you like to be one of my boarders? She asked, then laughed softly. No need to look like that. Even if I would bond you against your will, I couldn't so long as you have that Tirangrial. I agree, Master Coffin. It may cost our best chance to stop the Shan-Chen, but I will no longer bother. Precious. Tuan hissed like a doused cat, and he sighed again. What you gained on the swings, you lost on the roundabouts. He spent part of that night doing what he liked least in the world. Working. Digging a deep hole to bury the three Adom. He did the job himself because, surprisingly, Jolene wanted them. They were Tirangrial, after all, and the White Tower needed to study them. That might well have been so, but the Tower would just have to find their Adom elsewhere. He was fairly certain that none of the Red Arms would have handed them over if he told them to bury the things, yet he was taking their chances that they would reappear to cause more trouble. It started raining before the hole was knee-deep. A cold, driving rain. By the time he was done, he was soaked to the skin and mud to his waist. A fine end to a fine night, with the dice bouncing around his skull. Chapter 10. A Village in Shiota. The following day brought a respite, so it seemed. Tuon, in a blue silk riding dress and her wide tooled leather belt, not only rode beside him as the show rolled slowly north, she waggled her fingers at Selucia when the woman tried to put her gun between them. Selucia had acquired her own mount somehow, a compact gelding that could not match Pip's Arcadian, but still surpassed the Dapple by a fair margin. The blue-eyed woman, with a green headscarf beneath her cowl today, fell in on Tuon's other side, and her face would have done an Aes Sedai proud when it came to giving nothing away. Nat could not help grinning. Let her hide frustration for a change. Lacking horses, the real Aes Sedai were confined to their wagon. Netwin was too far away on the driver's seat of the purple wagon to overhear what he said to Tuon. Only a few thin clouds remained in the sky from the night's rain, and all seemed bright in the world. Even the dice bouncing in his head could steal nothing from that. Well, there were bad moments, but only moments. Early on, a flight of ravens winged overhead, a dozen or more big black birds. They flew swiftly, never deviating from their line, but he eyed them anyway until they dwindled to specks and vanished. Nothing to spoil the day there, not for him at least, maybe for someone farther north. Did you see some omen in them, Tuon? Tuon asked. She was as graceful in the saddle as she was in everything else she did. He could not recall seeing her be awkward about anything. Most omens I know concerning ravens specifically have to do with them perching on someone's rooftop, or cawing at dawn or dusk. They can be spies for the Dark One, he told her. Sometimes. Crows, too. And rats. But they didn't stop to look at us, so we don't need to worry. Running a green-gloved hand across the top of her head, she sighed. Toy, toy, she murmured, resettling the cowl of her cloak. How many children's tales do you believe? Do you believe that if you sleep on Old Hobbs Hill under a full moon, the foxes will give you true answers to 3 questions? Or that snakes steal people's skins and take the nourishment from food so you can starve to death while eating your fill? Putting on a smile took effort. I don't think I ever heard either one of those. Making his voice amused required effort, too. What were the odds of her mentioning foxes giving true answers, which the eelfin did after a fashion, in the same breath with snakes stealing skins? He was pretty sure that the eelfin did, and made leather from it. But it was old Hob that nearly made him flinch. The other was likely just Treveran twisting at the world. She certainly knew nothing about him and the snakes or the foxes. In Shandala, the land where Arthur Hawkwing had been born, though, Old Hob, Kaizen Hob, had been another name for the Dark One. The Aelfin and the Eelfin both surely deserved to be connected to the Dark One, yet that was hardly anything he wanted to think on, when he had his own connection to the Bloody Foxes. And to the snakes, too? That possibility was enough to sour his stomach. Still, it was a pleasant ride, with the day warming as the sun rose, though it never could be called warm. He juggled 6 colored wooden balls, and Tuon laughed and clapped her hands, as well she should. That feat had impressed the juggler he bought the balls from, and it was harder while riding. He told several jokes that made her laugh, and one that made her roll her eyes and exchange finger twitchings with Selucia. Maybe she did not like jokes about common room serving maids. It had not been the least off color. He was no fool. He did wish she had laughed, though. She had a marvelous laugh, rich and warm and free. They talked of horses, and argued over training methods with stubborn animals. That pretty head held a few odd notions, such as that you could calm a fractious horse by biting its ear. That sounded more likely to send it up like a haystack fire. And she had never heard of humming under your breath to soothe a horse. I would not believe his father had taught him such a skill shy of demonstration. Well, I can hardly do that without a horse that needs soothing, can I? He said. She rolled her eyes again. Selucia rolled hers, too. There was no heat in the argument, though, no anger, just spirit. Tuon had so much spirit it seemed impossible it could fit into such a tiny woman. It was her silences that put a small damper on the day. more so than snakes or foxes. They were far away, and there was nothing to be done. She was right there beside him, and he had a great deal to do concerning her. She never alluded to what had happened with the three Aes Sedai, or to the sisters themselves either. She never mentioned his Tirangrial, or the fact that whatever she had made Tuslan or Jolene weave against him had failed. Pt.4 might as well have been a dream. She was like a general planning a battle, Satala had said, trained at intrigue and dissembling from infancy, according to Aeginan. And it was all aimed straight at him. But to what end? Surely it could not be some Shanchan blood form of courting. Aeginan knew little of that, but surely not. He had known Tuon a matter of weeks and kidnapped her. She called him toy and tried to buy him, and only a vain fool could twist that into a woman falling in love. Which left anything from some elaborate scheme for revenge to the White alone knew what. She had threatened to make him a cupbearer. That meant Dakovel, according to Aeginan, though she had scoffed at the notion. Cupbearers were chosen for their beauty, and in Aeginan's estimation, he fell far short. Well, in his own as well, truth to tell, not that he was likely to admit it to anybody. Any number of women had admired his face. Nothing that Tuon could not complete the marriage ceremony just to make him think himself home free and safe, then have him executed. Women were never simple, but Tuon made the rest look like children's games. For a long while, they saw not so much as a farm, but perhaps 2 hours after the sun passed its zenith, they came on a sizable village. The ring of a blacksmith's hammer on an anvil sounded dimly. The buildings, some of 3 stories, were all heavy timber framing with whitish plaster between, and had high-peaked roofs of thatch and tall stone chimneys. Something about them tugged at Matt's memory, but he could not say what. There was not a farm to be seen anywhere in the unbroken forest. But villages were always tied to farms, supporting them and living off them. They must all be further in from the road, back in the trees. Oddly, the people he could see ignored the approaching train of show wagons. A fellow in his shirt sleeves, right beside the road, glanced up from a hatchet he was sharpening on a grindstone, worked by a foot pedal, then bent to his work again as though he had seen nothing. A cluster of children came hurtling around a corner and darted into another street without more than a glance in the show's direction. Very odd. Most village children would stop to stare at a passing merchant's train, speculating on the strange places the merchant had been, and the show had more wagons than any number of merchants' trains. A peddler was coming from the north behind 6 horses, his wagon's high canvas cover almost hidden by clusters of pots and pans and kettles. That should have caused interest, too. Even a large village on a well-traveled road depended on peddlers for most things the people bought. But no one pointed or shouted that a peddler had come. They just went on about their business. Perhaps 300 paces short of the village, Lucas stood up on his driver's seat and looked back over the roof of his wagon. "We'll turn in here," he bellowed, gesturing toward a large meadow where wildflowers, cat daisies, and jump-ups, and something that might have been lovers' knots, dotted spring grasses already a foot high. Sitting back down, he suited his own words, and the other wagons began following, their wheels rutting the rain-sodden ground. As Matt turned pips toward the meadow, he heard the shoes of the peddlers' horses ringing on paving stones. The sound jerked him upright. That road had not been paved since... He pulled the gelding back around. The canvas-topped wagon was rolling over level gray paving stones that stretched just the width of the village. The peddler himself, a rotund fellow in a wide hat, was peering at the pavement and shaking his head, peering at the village and shaking his head. Peddlers followed fixed routes. He must have been this way 100 times. He had to know. The peddler halted his team and tied the reins to the brake handle. Matt cupped both hands around his mouth. "Keep going, man!" he shouted at the top of his lungs. "As fast as you can! Keep going!" The peddler glanced in his direction and hopped up on his seat quite spryly for such a stout man. Gesturing as grandly as Luther, he began to declaim. Matt could not make out the words, but he knew what they would be. News of the world that he had picked up along the way, interspersed with lists of his goods and claims for their vast superiority. Nobody in the village stopped to listen or even paused. "Keep going!" Matt bellowed. "They're dead! Keep going!" Behind them, somebody gasped. Tuan or Salusha, maybe both. Suddenly, the peddler's horses screamed, tossing their heads madly. They screamed like animals beyond the ragged edge of terror and kept screaming. Pips jerked in fear, and Matt had his hands full. The gelding danced in circles, wanting to run in any direction so long as it was away from here. Every horse belonging to the show heard those screams and began whinnying fearfully. The lions and bears began roaring, and the leopards joined in. That set some of the show's horses to screaming too, and rearing in their harnesses. The tumult built on itself in moments. As Matt swung round, struggling to control Pips, everyone he could see handling reins was fighting to keep a wild-eyed team from racing off or injuring themselves. Tuon's mare was dancing too, and Salusha's done. He had a moment of fear for Tuon, and she seemed to be handling like a hyena as well as she had in her race into the forest. Even Salusha seemed sure of her seat, if not of her mount. He caught glimpses of the peddler as well, pulling off his hat, peering toward the show. At last, Matt got Pips under control, blowing hard as if he had been run too hard for too long, but no longer trying to race away. It was too late. Likely, it had always been too late. Hat in hand, the ram peddler leaped down to see what was the matter with his horses. Landing, he lurched awkwardly and looked down toward his feet. His hat fell from his hand, landing on the hard-packed road. That was when he began screaming. The paving stones were gone, and he was ankle-deep in the road, just like his shrieking horses. Ankle-deep and sinking into rock-hard clay, as if into a bog, just like his horses and his wagon. And the village, houses and people melting slowly into the ground. The people never stopped what they were doing. Women walked along carrying baskets. A line of men carried a large timber on their shoulders. Children darted about. The fellow at the grindstone continued sharpening his hatchet. All of them nearly knee-deep in the ground by this time. Tuon caught Matt's coat from one side, Salusha from the other. That was the first he realized he had moved Pips toward the peddler. Light. "What do you think you can do?" Tuon demanded fiercely. "Nothing," he replied. His bow was done, the horn knocks fitted, the linen bowstrings braided and wound, but he had not fitted one arrow to its ash shaft yet. And with all the rain they had been having, the glue holding the goose feather fletchings was still tacky. That was all he could think of, the mercy of an arrow in the peddler's heart before he was pulled under completely. Would the man die, or was he being carried to wherever those dead Shiotans were going? That was what had caught him about those buildings. That was how country people had built in Shiota for near enough 300 years. He could not tear his eyes away. The sinking peddler shrieked loudly enough to be heard over the screaming of his team. "Help me!" he cried, waving his arms. He seemed to be looking straight at Matt. "Help me!" Over and over. Matt kept waiting for him to die, hoping for him to die. Surely that was better than the other. The man kept on screaming as he sank to his waist, to his chest. Desperately, he tipped back his head like a man being pulled under water, sucking for one last breath. Then his head vanished, and just his arms remained, frantically waving until they too were gone. Only his hat, lying on the road, said there had ever been a man there. When the last of the thatched rooftops and tall chimneys melted away, Matt let out a long breath. Where the village had been was another meadow decked out in cat daisies and jump-ups, where red and yellow butterflies fluttered from blossom to blossom. So peaceful. He wished he could believe the peddler was dead. Except for the few that had followed Luca into the meadow, the show's wagons stood strung out along the road, and everybody was down on the ground. Women comforting crying children, men trying to quiet trembling horses, everyone talking fearfully and loudly to be heard over the bears and the lions and the leopards. Well, everyone except the three Aes Sedai. They glided hurriedly up the road, Jolene heeled by Blerick and Fen. By their expressions, Aes Sedai and warders alike, you might have thought villages sinking into the ground were as common as house cats. Pausing beside the peddler's wide hat, the three of them stared down at it. Teslin picked it up and turned it over in her hands, then let it drop. Moving into the meadow where the village had stood, the sisters walked about talking, peering at this and that as if they could learn something from wildflowers and grasses. None had taken the time to don a cloak, but for once Matt could not find it in him to upbraid them. They might have channeled, but if so, they did not use enough of the power to make the foxhead turn chilly. He would not have taken them to task if they had. Not today. Not after what he had just seen. The arguing started right away. No one wanted to cross that patch of hard-packed clay that seemingly had been paved with stone. They shouted over one another, including the horse handlers and the seamstresses, all telling Luca what had to be done, and right now. Some wanted to turn back far enough to find a country road and use those narrower ways to find their way to Lugard. Others were for forgetting Lugard altogether, or striking out for Ilion by those country roads, or even going all the way back to Abu Dar and beyond. There was always Amadisia and Terabon, Uladon too, for that matter. Plenty of towns and cities there, and far from this shadow-cursed spot. Matt sat Pips's saddle, idly playing with his reins, and held his peace through all the shouting and arm-waving. The gelding gave a shiver now and then, but he was no longer attempting to bolt. Tom came striding through the crowd and laid a hand on Pips's neck. Julian and Amathera were close behind, she clinging to him, eyeing the showfolk fearfully, and then Noel went over. The boy looked as though he would have liked to cling to someone for comfort, to anyone, but he was old enough not to want it seen if he did. Noel appeared troubled too, shaking his head and muttering under his breath. He kept peering up the road toward the Aes Sedai. Doubtless by that night he would be claiming to have seen something very like this before, only on a much grander scale. "I think we'll be going on alone from here," Tom said quietly. Julian nodded grimly. "If we must," Matt replied. Small parties would stand out for those who were hunting for Tuon, or the kidnapped heir to the Seanchan Empire, else he would have left the show long since. Making their way to safety without the show to hide in would be much more dangerous, but it could be done. What he could not do was turn these people's minds. One glance into any of those frightened faces told him he did not have enough gold for that. There might not have been enough gold in the world. Luca listened in silence, a bright red cloak wrapped around him, until most of the showfolk's energy was spent. When their shouts began to trickle away, he flung back the cloak and walked among them. There were no grand gestures now. Here he clapped the man on the shoulder, there peered earnestly into a woman's eyes. The country roads? They would be half mud, more streams than roads from the spring rains. It would take twice as long to reach Lugard that way, 3 times, maybe longer. Matt almost choked to hear Luca invoke speed, but the man was hardly warming up. He talked of the labor of freeing wagons that bogged down, made his listeners all but see themselves straining to help the teams pull them through mud nearly hub deep on the wagon wheels. Not even a country road would get that bad, but he made them see it. At least he made Matt see it. Towns of any size would be few and far between along those back roads, the villages tiny for the most part. Few places to perform, and food for so many hard to come by. He said that while smiling sadly at a little girl of 6 or so who was peering up at him from the shelter of her mother's skirts. And you just knew he was envisioning her hungry and crying for food. More than one woman pulled her children close around her. As for Amadisia and Terabon, and yes, Gillidan, they would be fine places to perform. Baron Luca's grand traveling wonder show and display of marvels would visit those lands and draw immense crowds. One day. To reach any of them now, they must first return to Abu Dar, covering the same ground they had crossed these past weeks, passing the same towns where people were unlikely to lay out coin to see again what they had seen so short a time before.
All right, everyone. New call Anxious Life for tonight. But I want to thank everyone for stopping by and everyone who keeps stopping by. I appreciate all y'all support. So next time, everyone, y'all stay safe.